There is a man buried in the pages of Genesis who is not buried at all. Every other name in the chapter where he appears follows the same formula. He lived, he had sons and daughters, and he died. He lived, he had sons and daughters, and he died. The drumbeat of mortality pounding through 10 generations of the human race, from Adam to Noah, each life summarized in the same handful of words, each life ending with the same 3-word verdict. And he died. And then you reach the 7th name. And the pattern breaks. Genesis 5, verses 21 through 24. When Enoch had lived 65 years, he became the father of Methuselah. After he became the father of Methuselah, Enoch walked faithfully with God 300 years, and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Enoch lived 365 years. Enoch walked faithfully with God. Then he was no more, because God took him away. He was no more. God took him. No death, no burial, no tomb, no grave marker, no mourners gathering to say goodbye, while every other patriarch in that genealogy met death as an inevitability, as the wage that sin had been extracting from the human race since the garden. Enoch simply vanished from the earth. One day he was here. The next day he was not. And the text does not say he disappeared or that he was lost. It says, God took him. The creator of the universe reached into the physical world and extracted one specific man from the stream of mortality that carried every other human being to the grave. In all of recorded scripture, across thousands of years of human history, only 2 people experienced this: Enoch and the prophet Elijah. 2 men out of the billions who have walked this earth were taken by God without passing through death. And the writer of Hebrews, writing under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, confirms it without qualification. Hebrews 11, verse 5. By faith Enoch was taken from this life so that he did not experience death. He could not be found, because God had taken him away. For before he was taken, he was commended as one who pleased God. Before he was taken, he was commended. The commendation came first. The translation came second. God looked at this man's life, at the way he lived, at the quality of his relationship with the Almighty, and he commended it. He approved it. He declared it pleasing. And then, on the basis of that commendation, he took him. Not as a reward in the way we think of rewards, as a recognition that this man had achieved something so rare, so extraordinary, so different from the pattern of every other life around him, that the normal rules no longer applied. And the word that Genesis uses to describe what made Enoch different from every other name on that list is the most important word in this entire study, because it tells you not just what Enoch did, but how he did it. And more importantly, it tells you why God trusted this specific man with visions that would remain relevant for 5,000 years. The word is hithalek. Enoch walked faithfully with God. And hithalek is not a casual word. It is not the Hebrew word for strolling. It is not the word for traveling from one place to another. Hithalek is a reflexive form of the verb halak, which means to walk, and the reflexive form transforms it into something far more intimate. It means to walk oneself continuously, to move in an ongoing, habitual, unbroken pattern of movement alongside someone else. This is not a Sunday morning relationship. This is not a crisis-only relationship. This is not the kind of relationship where you check in with God when things are falling apart and forget about Him when things are stable. Hithalek describes a man whose daily, Moment by moment, breath by breath existence was oriented toward God, who woke up in the presence of God, and lay down at night in the presence of God, and conducted every hour between the two in the continuous unbroken awareness that he was not alone, that the Creator was walking beside him, that the conversation never stopped. And I need you to think about what that meant, practically, in Enoch's world. Because Enoch did not live in a monastery. He was not a hermit on a mountain top. The text tells us he had sons and daughters. He had a family. He had the same daily pressures, the same human complications, the same demands on his time and attention that every person in every generation has dealt with. And yet the text says he walked with God. Not that he walked with God when it was convenient, not that he walked with God during designated spiritual hours, and lived normally the rest of the time. The Hithalic was continuous, 300 years of continuous walking. That tells you something about the nature of the relationship. It was not compartmentalized. It was not separated from the rest of his life. The walking with God was not something Enoch did in addition to his regular existence. It was his regular existence. God was not an addition to his life. God was the environment of his life. The air he breathed, the ground he walked on, the lens through which everything else was seen. And this matters deeply for understanding why God showed Enoch what he showed him. Because there is a principle in Scripture that most people have heard, but few have truly internalized. The secret of the Lord is with those who fear him, and he will show them his covenant. Psalm 25, verse 14. The secret things belong to the Lord our God, but the things revealed belong to us and to our children forever. Deuteronomy 29, verse 29. God has secrets. God has hidden things. God has layers of revelation that are not distributed broadly to every person on the planet, but are reserved for those whose relationship with him has reached a depth where the secrets can be safely held. Because divine revelation is not just information. It is weight. It is responsibility. It is the burden of knowing what others do not know and carrying that knowledge without being crushed by it or corrupted by it. Enoch carried the weight. 300 years of Hitholic had prepared a vessel strong enough to receive visions of the Watcher's rebellion, the corruption of the earth, the coming flood, the judgment of the fallen angels, the architecture of the heavens, and the signs that would mark the end of the age. That is an extraordinary amount of prophetic weight for a single human life, and the only explanation the text gives for how he carried it is the walking, the daily, continuous, unbroken communion with the God who was both the source of the visions and the strength required to bear them. And here is what that means for you, personally, right now. If the depth of relationship determines the depth of revelation, and if Enoch received the deepest revelation because he had the deepest walk, then the capacity to understand what you are hearing in this study is directly connected to the quality of your own walking. Not your theological education, not your prophetic awareness, not how many blood moon videos you have watched. Your walking, your Hithalic, your daily, continuous, honest communion with the God who placed the moon in the sky and wrote the message it carries. The visions we are about to explore were given to a man who earned the right to see them by walking, and the application of those visions to your life will be received in proportion to how faithfully you are walking right now. that is not meant to discourage you. It is meant to recalibrate your expectations, because the blood moon is not a spectacle to be consumed. It is a sign to be understood, and understanding is the fruit of relationship. Enoch did not understand the heavens because he was clever. He understood them because the one who made the heavens was walking beside him and explaining what he saw. And that same God is available to you. Right now, tonight, in whatever room you are sitting in. The Hithalic is not reserved for ancient patriarchs who lived before the flood. It is available to every human being who is willing to walk, continuously, honestly, daily, with the God who is still speaking through the heavens to anyone who has ears to hear. And the revelation was extraordinary. It covered the rebellion of the Watchers, the corruption of the earth, the flood that was coming, the judgment of the fallen angels, the final judgment of all creation, and embedded within all of it, described with a precision that scholars have studied for centuries, a complete and detailed account of how the heavenly bodies move and what their movements mean. The Astronomical Book, chapters 72 through 82 of the Book of Enoch. And before we open it, I need to establish why it deserves your attention. Because the Book of Enoch is not part of your Bible, and that fact requires an honest explanation, not a dismissal. The Book of Enoch was widely read and deeply respected in the ancient Jewish world and in the early church. When the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered at Qumran, the community that had preserved the oldest known copies of the Old Testament scriptures had also preserved more copies of the Book of Enoch than almost any other non-biblical text. They placed it alongside Isaiah and Psalms and Deuteronomy. They considered it essential reading for a community that was preparing itself for the end of the age. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church, one of the oldest Christian traditions on earth, has included the Book of Enoch in its biblical canon for nearly 2,000 years. The early church fathers Tertullian and Origen and Clement of Alexandria engaged with it seriously. And most significantly, the New Testament itself treats the Book of Enoch with a respect that is impossible to ignore. The Apostle Jude, the brother of Jesus, writing under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, quotes the Book of Enoch directly in his canonical letter. Jude verses 14 and 15. Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesied about them. See, the Lord is coming with thousands upon thousands of his holy ones to judge everyone, and to convict all of them of all the ungodly acts they have committed in their ungodliness, and of all the defiant words ungodly sinners have spoken against him. That passage comes from the Book of Enoch, chapter 1, verse 9. Jude treats it as prophetic truth. He places it inside the canon of the New Testament. He attributes it to Enoch by name and presents it as a genuine prophecy with ongoing relevance. And the Apostle Peter in 2 Peter 2, verse 4, writes about angels who sinned being sent to Tartarus, a word that appears nowhere else in the entire New Testament, a word that corresponds directly to the imprisonment of the Watchers, as described in the Book of Enoch. Peter is operating within the theological framework that the Book of Enoch establishes. He expects his readers to understand the reference, because the Book of Enoch was part of the shared knowledge of the early church. So when I open the astronomical book and show you what Enoch recorded about the heavenly bodies and what their movements signify, I am not importing foreign material into a biblical conversation. I am opening the backstory that the New Testament authors themselves considered authoritative. The text that Genesis assumes you know, the detail behind the headline that Genesis 5:24 provides. If this message is already stirring something in you, if the weight of what Enoch carried is beginning to settle on your spirit, hit that like button right now, subscribe to this channel, and turn on notifications. Because what we are about to uncover across the rest of this study is something that most blood moon videos have never gone deep enough to show you. The blood moon is not an isolated sign. It is one signal inside a complete prophetic architecture that Enoch was shown in full, that Joel received a fragment of, that Jesus confirmed, and that Revelation completes. And by the time we reach the end, you are going to see the sky with different eyes. Share this with someone who needs to see it too, because the heavens are speaking right now, and most people do not know how to listen. Now, the astronomical book, chapters 72 through 82 of the Book of Enoch, contain the most detailed account of celestial mechanics in any ancient text, religious or secular, from the pre-Greek world. Enoch describes the paths of the sun and the moon. He describes the gates through which they rise and set. He describes the seasons and how they are governed by the movements of the luminaries. He describes the relationship between the solar and lunar calendars with a precision that modern scholars have found remarkably consistent with observable astronomy. But here is what makes the astronomical book prophetically significant. Enoch does not describe the heavenly bodies as neutral physical objects orbiting through empty space. He describes them as servants, as agents of divine communication, as messengers assigned by God to carry information from heaven to earth in a language that every human being on the planet can see. And this is not Enoch's invention. This is God's design. Genesis 1 verse 14 establishes it at the very beginning of creation. And God said, "Let there be lights in the vault of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them serve as signs to mark sacred times and days and years." The Hebrew word for signs is otot, and otot does not mean decoration. It does not mean background scenery for a beautiful sunset. Otot means a signal, a mark, a covenant indicator. The same word is used for the mark God placed on Cain. The same word is used for the rainbow after the flood. The same word is used for the plagues in Egypt. Every use of otot in Scripture describes a moment when God is communicating through the physical world, making the invisible visible, translating divine intention into material reality. And Enoch understood this. 300 years of walking with God had given him a fluency in the divine communication system that no other human being possessed. He could read the heavens the way a scholar reads a manuscript, not because he had studied astronomy in the modern sense, because the author of the heavens was walking beside him and explaining the text as they went. And what the author explained to Enoch about the moon, specifically about moments when the moon's light changes, when its appearance deviates from its normal pattern, when its face takes on the color of blood, is the thread that connects a man who lived 5,000 years ago to the sky above your head tonight. Enoch chapter 73 describes the lunar cycle with systematic detail. The phases of the moon, the relationship between its light and the light of the sun, the way its appearance waxes and wanes according to a divinely established pattern. This is not mysticism. This is a man recording what he was shown about the operating system of the heavens. But it is in chapter 80 that the tone changes. In chapter 80, Enoch moves from describing the ordered, predictable, faithfully maintained movements of the celestial bodies to describing what happens when that order is disrupted, when the luminaries deviate from their appointed paths, when the communication system that God built into the heavens begins to carry a different kind of message. Enoch chapter 80, verses 2 through 8. And in the days of the sinners the years shall be shortened, and their seed shall be late on their lands and on their fields, and all things on the earth shall alter, and shall not appear in their time. And the rain shall be kept back, and the heaven shall withhold it, and in those times the fruits of the earth shall be late, and shall not grow in their time, and the fruits of the trees shall be withheld in their time. And the moon shall alter her order, and not appear at her appointed time. The moon shall alter her order. That phrase, in the context of everything Enoch has established about the heavenly bodies as servants of divine communication, is not describing a mechanical malfunction. It is describing a message. The moon altering her order is the celestial communication system carrying an urgent transmission. The normal pattern is being interrupted because what God needs to say in that moment is not a normal message. And Enoch connects this alteration to a specific condition on the earth in the days of the sinners, in the days when the years are shortened, and the harvest fails, and the rain is withheld, and the fruits do not grow in their time. In other words, in the days when the consequences of human rebellion against God have reached a point where creation itself is affected. When the curse of Genesis 3 has compounded across so many generations that even the natural order is groaning under its weight. Romans 8, verse 22. We know that the whole creation has been groaning as in the pains of childbirth right up to the present time. The whole creation groaning. Paul describes in the language of the New Testament what Enoch described in the language of the pre-flood world, a creation that is not neutral, that is not indifferent to what happens on the earth, that is affected by human rebellion the way a body is affected by disease. And the signs in the heavens, the blood moon, the alteration of the moon's order, the deviation from the normal pattern, these are the groaning made visible. The creation's cry of pain, written across the sky, in a color that every culture in every era of human history associates with the same thing. Blood. And here is the insight that the reference most people have been given about blood moons completely misses. The blood moon in Enoch's framework is not just a sign from God. It is a sign that the creation itself is responding to what is happening on the earth. The heavens are not passive billboards that God hangs messages on. They are living, responsive, interconnected parts of a creation that was designed to operate in harmony with its creator. And when the earth is corrupted, when the covenant is broken, when humanity rebels against the God who made them, the creation responds. It groans, it alters its order. The moon does not simply happen to turn red. The moon turns red because something is wrong, and the cosmic order that God established can feel it, even if the people living under it cannot. This is the same principle that operates in Genesis 4, when Cain kills Abel, and God says in verse 10, "Your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground." The blood cries out. The ground itself becomes a witness. The earth responds to what happens on its surface, because the earth is not a dead stage on which the drama of human history plays out. It is a living creation that is connected to its creator, and that registers the impact of human rebellion at a level most people never consider. And if the ground cried out when one man's blood was spilled in Genesis 4, what is the ground crying out now? What is the creation groaning about in a generation where the blood of millions of innocents has soaked into the earth across centuries of violence and injustice? What is the cosmic order registering about a civilization that has industrialized destruction on a scale that Azazel could not have imagined when he first taught men to forge swords? The moon turning to blood is the creation's loudest cry. It is the heavenly order doing what the ground did in Genesis 4, testifying, bearing witness, declaring in a language visible from every continent on earth that something has gone profoundly, catastrophically wrong, and that the God who hears the cry, the God who heard Abel's blood and responded, the God who has never once in all of Scripture ignored the testimony of his own creation, is about to respond again. That is what Enoch saw 5,000 years ago. Not just a red moon, a creation in pain, a cosmic system designed for worship and communication being forced to carry a message of warning because the beings it was designed to serve had stopped listening to every other form of communication God had tried. And that vision, that understanding of the blood moon as the creation's groan made visible, is the foundation for everything that Joel would later declare, everything that Jesus would later confirm, and everything that John would later witness when the sixth seal opened and the moon turned the color of blood over a world that had run out of time. But Enoch did not see the blood moon in isolation. He saw it as one signal inside a larger system, one light on a dashboard that was showing multiple warnings simultaneously. And the other signals he saw, the other warnings that accompany the alteration of the moon's order, form a pattern that matches what the world looks like right now, with a precision that cannot be explained by coincidence. The years shortened, the harvest failing, the rain withheld, the fruits not growing in their time, the natural order disrupted by the weight of accumulated human rebellion. And above it all, the moon altering her order, changing her appearance, turning the color that the prophets after Enoch would learn to call blood. That is the full picture. That is what the man who walked with God for 300 years was shown about the heavenly bodies and their role in the prophetic communication between heaven and earth. The blood moon is not a standalone event. It is the most visible expression of a cosmic system that is responding to the spiritual condition of the world beneath it. And the question that this understanding forces you to ask is not, when is the next blood moon? The question is, what is the condition of the world that is producing the groan? What has accumulated on the earth that is causing the creation to cry out in a language written in red across the night sky? And whether the people who see it will recognize it for what it is. Most will not. Most will photograph it and scroll past. Most will treat it as a beautiful anomaly, an Instagram moment, a cool thing that happened in the sky that one time. And the heavens will have spoken, and the earth will not have heard. But Enoch heard, Joel heard, Jesus heard, John heard. And you are hearing right now. Because the prophetic chain that began with a man who walked with God 5,000 years ago is about to be laid out in full, voice by voice, vision by vision, layer by layer, until the complete picture emerges and the blood moon stops being a curiosity and becomes what it was always meant to be, a warning, a groan, a cry from the creation that was designed to carry the glory of God and is instead carrying the weight of a world that has forgotten him. And the first voice after Enoch to receive this message, the prophet who would add the next layer to the revelation, the one who would place the blood moon on a specific prophetic timeline and connect it to a specific event that changes everything, is Joel. And what Joel added to Enoch's vision is the piece that most blood moon teachers skip entirely, because Joel did not just confirm the blood moon. He told you what comes before it, and what comes before it is the part of the story that makes the blood moon make sense. That is where we are going next. And once you see what Joel saw, you will never look at the sky the same way again. Joel did not know the name Enoch the way you know it. He did not have a leather-bound copy of the Book of Enoch sitting on a shelf in his house. He was not reading ancient manuscripts by lamplight and connecting footnotes the way a modern prophecy student might. Joel lived in a different era, under a different covenant, speaking to a different generation. But the God who spoke to Joel was the same God who had walked with Enoch. And what God told Joel about the blood moon was not a new revelation. It was the next chapter of the same revelation, a continuation of a message that had begun in the pre-flood world and was now being delivered to a nation that was standing at the edge of something it could not yet see. And the way God delivered it to Joel was not through a cosmic tour of the heavens. It was not through an angelic guide explaining the architecture of the celestial gates. God delivered the blood moon message to Joel through the most ordinary, most overlooked, most despised creatures on the face of the earth. Locusts. Joel chapter 1 verse 4. What the swarming locust has left, the hopping locust has eaten. What the hopping locust has left, the destroying locust has eaten. What the destroying locust has left, the cutting locust has eaten. 4 waves of destruction, 4 stages of devastation, and buried inside what looks like a straightforward agricultural disaster report is one of the most precisely constructed prophetic sequences in the entire Old Testament. Because the 4 locusts Joel names are not interchangeable. They are not 4 synonyms for the same insect. They are 4 different Hebrew words, each describing a different stage of the locust's development, each carrying a different shade of meaning, and together forming a progression that maps onto something far larger than a plague of insects. The first word is gazam, the gnawing locust. The word comes from a root that means to cut off, to devour, to consume the edges. Gazam does not destroy the core. It strips the perimeter. It removes the outer layer, the protective covering, the first line of defense. Think about what that means spiritually. Before total destruction comes, something strips away the protection first. The boundaries dissolve, the hedges come down. The things that were keeping the core safe are quietly, systematically removed. And most people do not notice because the core still looks intact. The tree is still standing. The field still looks green from a distance, but the edges are gone. The protection has been eaten away, and what remains is exposed to whatever comes next. The second word is arbe. This is the swarming locust, and arbe comes from a root that means to multiply, to become numerous, to increase beyond counting. If Gazam was surgical and targeted, Arbe is overwhelming. It is the sheer volume of what descends, not precision, numbers, so many that the sky darkens, so many that the sound of their wings becomes the only thing you can hear. Arbesh is the moment when the problem stops being manageable, when the crisis crosses the threshold from something you can handle into something that handles you, when the sheer scale of what you are facing exceeds your capacity to respond. The third word is Yelek, the licking locust, and Yelek describes the larval stage of the locust, the nymph that has not yet developed wings. It crawls instead of flies. It moves along the ground, consuming everything at root level. What Gazam stripped from the edges and Arbe consumed in overwhelming volume, Yelek now finishes at the foundation. It attacks what is left at the lowest level, the roots, the base, the part of the plant that holds everything else up. And because Yelek crawls rather than swarms, it is slower, less dramatic, less visible. The destruction of Yelek does not make the evening news. It happens at ground level, in the soil, in the dark, where no one is watching. But when Yelek finishes its work, there is nothing left to regenerate from. The roots are gone. And the fourth word is Hasil, the consuming locust, the finisher. Hasil comes from a root that means to devour completely, to finish off, to leave nothing behind. Hasil arrives after the edges have been stripped, after the overwhelming swarm has consumed the visible growth, after the crawling larvae have destroyed the roots. Hasil takes what is left, which is almost nothing, and reduces it to less than nothing, to bare ground, to dust, to the absolute absence of anything that was once alive and growing and fruitful. And I need to pause here and ask you something. Because this is not ancient history. This is a diagnostic tool. And if you are honest with yourself right now, if you stop listening to this as a Bible study and start listening to it as a mirror, you will recognize which stage you are in. Has something been quietly stripped from the edges of your life? Something you used to have that you cannot quite name, but you know is gone? A spiritual sensitivity you once carried? A peace that used to be there when you prayed? A sense of protection over your family, your mind, your home? That is Gazam. The gnawing locust has been at work, and most people do not recognize it, because the core still looks intact. You are still going to church, still reading your Bible occasionally, still calling yourself a believer, but the edges are exposed. The hedge has been eaten, and you have been living in a stripped condition so long you have forgotten what it felt like to be covered. Or maybe you are past Gazam. Maybe the overwhelming swarm has already descended. Maybe the problems in your life have multiplied beyond your ability to manage them. The financial pressures, the relational breakdowns, the health crises, the spiritual confusion. Not one crisis, but many, coming from every direction at once, so numerous that you cannot even prioritize which fire to put out first, because they are all burning simultaneously. That is Arbe, the swarming locust, and it does not respond to your coping mechanisms because it was never designed to be managed. It was designed to overwhelm. Or maybe it is quieter than that. Maybe the destruction in your life right now is not dramatic. It is not overwhelming. It is subtle. Underground, at root level, the slow erosion of your faith, the gradual deadening of your prayer life, the almost imperceptible drift away from the things that once anchored you. Nobody sees it. Nobody is alarmed, because Yelek does not swarm. It crawls, it works in the dark, and by the time you notice what has been consumed, the roots are gone, and you are living off the memory of a faith that no longer has anything feeding it. Joel's 4 words are not just a description of an ancient agricultural disaster. They are a diagnosis of what happens to any life, any family, any church, any civilization that has moved away from God long enough for the consequences to arrive. And the consequences do not arrive all at once. They arrive in stages. And each stage is a mercy, because each stage is another opportunity to recognize what is happening and turn around before the next stage arrives. That is the genius of Joel's construction. The 4-stage pattern is not just destruction. It is graduated warning. God does not skip from Gazam to Hasil. He does not go from the first nibble at the edges to total annihilation without giving you every possible opportunity to see what is happening and respond. The progression is slow enough to be recognized, specific enough to be identified, and each stage leaves enough intact that recovery is still possible, right up until it is not. 4 words, 4 stages: Gazam, Arbe, Yelek, Hasil. And here is what Joel is doing with them that most teachers of this passage completely miss. Joel is not just describing a locust plague. Joel is describing a pattern, a methodology, a sequence of destruction that operates the same way whether you are talking about a nation, a family, a church, a civilization, or a human soul. First, the edges are stripped. Then the overwhelming assault comes. Then the quiet, invisible destruction of the foundations. Then the complete consumption of whatever remains. And Joel presents this pattern not as a random natural disaster, but as something God is asking his people to see, to recognize, to understand as a message. Because the locusts in Joel are not just insects, they are otot, signs, the same category of divine communication that Enoch identified in the heavenly bodies. God speaks through creation, and when God sends a locust swarm that strips a nation bare in 4 precise stages, he is not being random. He is being articulate. He is saying something specific, and the specificity is in the Hebrew words themselves. Now, here is where Joel does something that transforms the locust plague from a regional agricultural disaster into a prophetic event with global and eternal implications. Joel chapter 2, verse 1. Blow the trumpet in Zion. Sound the alarm on my holy mountain. Let all who live in the land tremble. For the day of the Lord is coming. It is close at hand. The day of the Lord, Yom Yahweh. Joel takes the 4-stage locust sequence from chapter 1 and reframes it in chapter 2 as the precursor to the day of the Lord. The locust plague was not the main event. It was the warning system. The 4-stage pattern of destruction that stripped the nation bare was God's way of getting their attention before the real message arrived, before the trumpet sounded, before the alarm was raised on the holy mountain, before the day that changes everything. And the army Joel describes in chapter 2 is no longer insects. Listen to his language and tell me he is still talking about locusts. Joel 2 verses 2 through 11. A day of darkness and gloom, a day of clouds and blackness. Like dawn spreading across the mountains, a large and mighty army comes, such as never was in ancient times, nor ever will be in ages to come. Before them fire devours, behind them a flame blazes. Before them the land is like the Garden of Eden, behind them a desert waste. Nothing escapes them. They have the appearance of horses. They gallop along like cavalry. With a noise like chariots, they leap over the mountain tops, like a crackling fire consuming stubble, like a mighty army drawn up for battle. At the sight of them, nations are in anguish. Every face turns pale. They charge like warriors. They scale walls like soldiers. They all march in line, not swerving from their course. They do not jostle each other. Each marches straight ahead. They plunge through defenses without breaking ranks. They rush upon the city. They run along the wall. They climb into the houses. Like thieves, they enter through the windows. Before them the earth shakes, the heavens tremble. The sun and moon are darkened, and the stars no longer shine. Before them the earth shakes, the heavens tremble. The sun and moon are darkened. This is not a locust plague. This is not an agricultural report. Joel has shifted registers entirely. He has taken the four-stage destruction pattern of chapter 1, revealed its connection to the day of the Lord in chapter 2, and now he is describing a force so powerful, so terrifying, so fundamentally different from anything the world has seen, that creation itself responds to its approach. The earth shakes, the heavens tremble, the luminaries go dark. And notice what Joel says about the sun and the moon. He says they are darkened, the same luminaries that Enoch described as servants of divine communication, the same heavenly bodies that carry the otot, the signs, the covenant indicators. When Joel's army advances, the heavenly communication system responds. It goes dark. The normal messages stop. The regular cycle of light and seasons and ordered celestial movement that Enoch described in the astronomical book is interrupted. The dashboard lights change, and Joel is building toward something. He is constructing a prophetic timeline, and every element he introduces is a step on that timeline. The locust plague is step 1. The alarm on Zion is step 2. The army that darkens the sun and moon is step 3. And then, right at the moment when you think the destruction is complete, when the army is advancing, and the heavens are trembling, and there is no hope left, Joel inserts the most shocking turn in the entire Old Testament prophetic tradition. Joel 2, verse 12. "Even now, declares the Lord, return to me with all your heart, with fasting and weeping and mourning." Even now, Gamata. Those two Hebrew words are among the most extraordinary in all of Scripture, because of where they appear. They appear in the middle of an advancing army. They appear after the locust plague has stripped the nation bare, after the trumpet has sounded, after the day of the Lord has been announced, after the heavens have started to tremble, after the sun and moon have been darkened, after every visible sign indicates that judgment is not only inevitable, but already underway. Even now, even at this late stage, even after everything I have described, even after the 4 waves of destruction and the army at the gates and the darkening of the heavens, even now there is a door open, even now there is a way back, even now, in the middle of what looks like the end, I am still speaking, I am still reaching. I am still offering what no human court and no human system and no human logic would offer to a people who have been warned this many times and still have not turned. Return to me. Shuvu Eli. Come back, turn around. The Hebrew word shuv is the word for repentance in its most physical, most literal sense. It does not mean feel bad about what you have done. It means stop walking in the direction you are walking and walk the other way. It is a word of motion, a word of direction, a word that assumes you have been moving away and that the only solution is to stop the motion and reverse it. And notice what God does not say. He does not say return to your former religious habits. He does not say return to church attendance. He does not say return to the version of yourself that looked more spiritual from the outside. He says return to me. Shuvu Eli. The destination is not a behavior. The destination is a person. The direction is not toward a standard or a program or a set of practices. The direction is toward the God who is speaking. It is relational, not institutional. It is personal, not procedural. And God says this not before the judgment begins, not as a preemptive offer while things are still comfortable. He says it in the middle of the advance, while the army is marching, while the earth is shaking, while the heavens are going dark. That is the scandal of Joel 2:12, that grace does not expire when judgment begins, that the door does not close when the army arrives, that even in the middle of what looks like the end of everything, God is still whispering, Shuvu Eli, come back to me. I want you to sit with that for a moment. Because if you are anything like me, your instinct when you hear about judgment and armies and darkened heavens is to calculate whether you are safe. To mentally check the boxes, to reassure yourself that you are on the right side of the line. But Joel 2:12 is not addressed to the people on the wrong side of the line. It is addressed to God's own people, to Zion, to the ones who already know his name. The even now is not a message for pagans who have never heard of God. It is a message for believers who have drifted so far that they need an army at the gates to wake them up. And if that describes you, if the locusts have already done their work, and you can feel the ground shaking, and you know in your spirit that something has been advancing toward you for a long time, then hear the even now. It is not too late. It is not too far gone. The army is marching, and the heavens are trembling, and you think you have disqualified yourself from the mercy of God. And God himself is saying, even now, even at this stage, even after everything you have done and failed to do and refused to do, even now, Shuvu Eli, come back to me, not to religion, to me. And then Joel reveals what happens if they do, what God will do in response to a genuine return. And this is the passage that connects Joel's vision directly back to what Enoch saw, and directly forward to what Jesus would confirm, and directly into the book of Revelation. Joel 2 verse 28. And afterward, I will pour out my spirit on all people. Your sons and daughters will prophesy, your old men will dream dreams, your young men will see visions. Even on my servants, both men and women, I will pour out my spirit in those days. The outpouring. The Spirit of God released not to a select few prophets, not to a priestly class, not to the spiritually elite, but to all flesh. Sons and daughters, old men and young men, male servants and female servants, every demographic, every generation, every social class. The democratization of the prophetic gift that had been reserved for figures like Enoch and Moses and Elijah was now being promised to everyone. And this is the moment where Joel places the blood moon on the prophetic timeline, because immediately after describing the outpouring of the Spirit, Joel says this, Joel 2 verse 30 and 31. I will show wonders in the heavens and on the earth, blood and fire and billows of smoke. The sun will be turned to darkness and the moon to blood before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. Before, that word changes everything. The moon turning to blood comes before the great and dreadful day of the Lord. Not during, not after. Before. The blood moon is not the judgment. It is the final warning before the judgment. It is the last signal the celestial communication system sends before the day that changes everything arrives. And the Hebrew word for before here is lifnei, which literally means to the face of, in front of, in the presence of. The blood moon appears lifnei, to the face of, the great and dreadful day. It stands in front of the judgment like a herald standing in front of a king, announcing what is coming, declaring who approaches, giving the population one last chance to prepare before the throne arrives. Think about what that means. If the blood moon is the herald, and the day of the Lord is the king, then the herald has already been sounding in our generation. The blood moon tetrades of 2014 and 2015. The lunar eclipses that fell on the biblical feast days of Passover and Tabernacles in consecutive years. The celestial events that the scientific community explains with orbital mechanics, and the prophetic community has struggled to place on a timeline. Joel placed them on the timeline 3,000 years ago. They come lifnai, to the face of, in the direct presence of, immediately preceding, the great and dreadful day. And the word great in Hebrew is gadol, and the word dreadful is nora. Gadol means large, weighty, significant beyond measure, and nora means awe-inspiring, terrifying, worthy of trembling. The day of the Lord is not just big. It is the kind of big that makes everything else you have ever experienced feel small. It is the kind of dreadful that redefines what that word means. Not dreadful, as in unpleasant. Dreadful, as in the full weight of eternal reality pressing into temporal space with nothing left to buffer the impact. Nora. The day that is coming is Nora, and the blood moon is the last thing you see before it arrives. And now the prophetic sequence Joel has constructed becomes clear. First, the locust plague, the 4 stages of destruction that strip away protection, overwhelm with volume, destroy the foundations, and consume what remains. Then the alarm on Zion, the trumpet blast, the announcement that the day of the Lord is approaching. Then the advancing army that darkens the heavens. Then, in the middle of the advance, the whispered invitation. Even now, return to me. Then, for those who return, the outpouring of the Spirit. And then, after the outpouring, and before the final day, the blood moon. The creation's groan made visible in the sky. The same signal Enoch saw 5,000 years earlier, now placed on a specific timeline, with specific events leading up to it, and a specific event following it. Joel has done what Enoch could not do alone. Enoch saw the blood moon as part of a cosmic system responding to human rebellion. Joel placed the blood moon on a prophetic timeline and showed you what surrounds it, what precedes it, what follows it, and most critically, what interrupts it. Because the single most important element in Joel's prophetic sequence is not the locusts, not the army, not the blood moon. It is the even now. It is the 2-word interruption in the middle of an advancing judgment, where God pauses the entire cosmic machinery to whisper one more invitation to a people who have already been warned beyond what justice requires. And that interruption, that scandalous grace in the middle of earned destruction, is the detail that most blood moon teachers skip entirely. They show you the blood moon. They show you the darkened sun. They show you the army, and the fire, and the smoke. And they never tell you about the whisper. They never tell you that built into the prophetic timeline, between the judgment and the sign, there is a pause, a breath, a moment where the God who is shaking the heavens stops shaking them, long enough to say, "Come back." Joel understood something about the character of God that transforms the blood moon from a terrifying omen into something far more complex, far more heartbreaking. The blood moon is a warning, yes. It is a sign that judgment is approaching. But it is a warning issued by a God who builds escape routes into his own judgments, who embeds grace into his own wrath, who cannot bring himself to execute the sentence without first exhausting every possible avenue of mercy. And that is why the blood moon is not the end of the message. It is the penultimate signal, the second-to-last transmission. Because after the blood moon, Joel says, comes the great and dreadful day of the Lord. But between now and that day, there is still the outpouring, still the Spirit, still the open door, still the whispered Shuvu Eli, echoing through the corridors of a creation that is groaning, but has not yet given its final groan. Now, Joel adds one more layer that connects his vision back to Enoch's in a way that most commentators have not noticed. Because Joel does not only describe the blood moon, he describes the condition of the earth that produces it. And the condition Joel describes matches Enoch chapter 80 with a precision that cannot be explained by coincidence. Enoch 80. In the days of the sinners, the years shall be shortened. Their seed shall be late on their lands. The rain shall be kept back. The fruits of the earth shall not grow in their time. Joel 1. The fields are ruined. The ground is dried up. The grain is destroyed. The new wine is dried up. The olive oil fails. The seeds are shriveled beneath the clods. The storehouses are in ruins. The granaries have been broken down, for the grain has dried up. Both prophets, separated by thousands of years, describe the same conditions: failed harvests, disrupted seasons, agricultural collapse, a creation that has stopped functioning according to its designed order because the beings it was designed to serve have broken the covenant that held everything in place. And both prophets connect those earthly conditions to the celestial signs. Enoch says, "The moon shall alter her order in the days of the sinners." Joel says the moon will turn to blood before the great and dreadful day. The earth fails, the heavens respond, the creation groans from the ground up and from the sky down simultaneously. And the blood moon is the point where the groaning above and the groaning below converge into a single visible sign that can be seen from every nation on earth. Joel was not inventing a new theology. He was receiving the next installment of the same revelation that Enoch had received. The same God, the same message, the same cosmic architecture, but with new detail, new specificity, a timeline that Enoch did not provide, an invitation that Enoch did not record, a grace note embedded in the middle of a judgment sequence that tells you something about the heart of God that the blood moon alone cannot convey. And Joel adds one final element that bridges his vision to what would come centuries later through Jesus Christ and the early church. Joel 2 verse 32. And everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved, for on Mount Zion and in Jerusalem there will be deliverance, as the Lord has said, even among the survivors whom the Lord calls. Everyone who calls, not everyone who performs the right rituals, not everyone who belongs to the right nation, not everyone who holds the right theological credentials, everyone who calls, the door that God opened with his even now, is not a narrow door reserved for the religious elite. It is a door wide enough for everyone who will walk through it. And the condition for walking through it is not perfection. It is calling. It is the cry of a human voice reaching toward the God who is still listening even while the heavens are darkening, and the moon is turning red, and the earth is groaning under the weight of accumulated rebellion. Everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. The Apostle Paul quotes this exact verse in Romans 10, verse 13, and applies it to the gospel of Jesus Christ. Peter quotes Joel's entire outpouring passage in Acts 2 on the day of Pentecost, standing in front of a crowd that had just witnessed the Spirit falling on 120 people in an upper room. Joel's prophecy was being fulfilled in real time. The outpouring was happening. The Spirit was falling on all flesh, just as Joel had said. And Peter, standing in the middle of its fulfillment, looked at the crowd and said this is what Joel was talking about, which means the prophetic timeline Joel constructed is not a distant future speculation. Part of it has already been fulfilled. The outpouring began at Pentecost. The Spirit was poured out on all flesh. The door was opened. And the blood moon, which Joel placed after the outpouring and before the great and dreadful day, is the next signal on the timeline, the one that comes after the Spirit has been poured out and before the final judgment arrives. We are living between the outpouring and the blood moon. We are living in the space Joel described, between the even now and the day of the Lord. The Spirit has been poured out. The door is still open. The invitation is still echoing. And the signs in the heavens that Joel said would come before the great and dreadful day are beginning to appear. That is not speculation. That is the prophetic timeline as Joel constructed it, as Peter confirmed it, and as Paul applied it. The question is not whether the timeline is real. The question is where we are on it. And the answer, based on the signs Joel described and the conditions Enoch predicted, is closer to the end than most people want to believe. But Joel's vision, as extraordinary as it is not the complete picture. Joel saw the blood moon and placed it on a timeline. He saw the outpouring and the day of the Lord, and the escape route built into the middle of the judgment. But there is a dimension of the blood moon that Joel did not address, a cosmic and spiritual dimension that requires a different voice to explain. A voice that was there when the moon was created. A voice that understood not just what the blood moon signifies on a prophetic timeline, but what it means in the context of a spiritual war that began before the flood and has not ended. That voice is Jesus. And what Jesus said about the blood moon, about the signs in the heavens, about the darkening of the sun and the falling of the stars, he said standing on a mountain that connects directly to the book of Enoch in a way that almost no one teaches. A mountain where the veil between heaven and earth was thinnest. A mountain with a name that carries a curse. A mountain where 200 angels descended and took an oath that would corrupt the earth and provoke the very judgment that the blood moon announces. Mount Hermon. And the connection between Jesus, Mount Hermon, and the blood moon prophecy is the missing piece that turns Joel's timeline into a three-dimensional picture of what is actually happening in the spiritual realm when the moon turns red. That is where we go next, and I need to warn you. What you are about to hear is not comfortable. It is not the kind of blood moon teaching that fits neatly into a prophecy chart or a YouTube thumbnail. It reaches into the oldest war in the universe and pulls the curtain back on something that most churches have been too cautious or too uninformed to address. The blood moon is not just a warning about the future. It is a testimony about a war that started in the heavens, was carried to the earth by beings who abandoned their proper dwelling, and has been raging beneath the surface of human history for 5,000 years. And the next voice in the prophetic chain, the voice of Jesus Christ himself, is about to tell you what the blood moon has to do with that war, and why the signs appearing in the sky right now are not just markers on a prophetic timeline. They are battle signals, indicators that the war Enoch saw, the war the Watchers started, the war that provoked the flood and corrupted the earth and broke the original harmony between heaven and earth, is entering its final phase. And if you are listening to this right now, you are not a spectator. You are in it. There is a moment in the Gospels that most readers pass through without stopping. A geographical detail that looks like background information. A place name that the text provides, and the reader skips because the conversation that follows seems more important than where it happened. But in the prophetic architecture of Scripture, where things happen is never accidental, and the place where Jesus chose to deliver the first explicit announcement of what was coming, the place where he began the sequence of teachings that would culminate in his blood moon prophecy on the Mount of Olives, is a place that connects him directly to Enoch, directly to the Watchers, and directly to the war that the blood moon was designed to announce. Matthew 16, verse 13. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" Caesarea Philippi, a city built at the base of a mountain, a city known throughout the ancient world as a center of pagan worship, a city where a massive cave opening in the rock face was believed to be an entrance to the underworld, a gateway between the realm of the living and the realm of the dead. The Greeks called it the Grotto of Pawn. The locals called it the Gates of Hell, and the mountain that towered above the city, the mountain whose snowmelt fed the spring that poured from the cave, the mountain that dominated the horizon in every direction, was Mount Hermon. And you need to understand what Mount Hermon meant in the ancient world, because it did not mean what it means to a modern tourist looking at a ski resort in the Golan Heights. Mount Hermon carried a weight of spiritual significance that stretched back thousands of years before Jesus stood at its base. And that significance is rooted in the book of Enoch. Enoch, chapter 6, verses 1 through 6. And it came to pass when the children of men had multiplied, that in those days were born unto them beautiful and comely daughters. And the angels, the children of the heaven, saw and lusted after them, and said to one another, Come, let us choose us wives from among the children of men, and beget us children. And Semjaza, who was their leader, said unto them, I fear ye will not indeed agree to do this deed, and I alone shall have to pay the penalty of a great sin. And they all answered him, and said, Let us all swear an oath, and all bind ourselves by mutual imprecations, not to abandon this plan, but to do this thing. Then swear they all together, and bound themselves by mutual imprecations upon it. And they were in all 200, who descended in the days of Jared on the summit of Mount Hermon, and they called it Mount Hermon, because they had sworn and bound themselves by mutual imprecations upon it. 200 angels descended on the summit of Mount Hermon, and the book of Enoch provides an etymology for the mountain's name that connects it to the Hebrew word cherem, which means a curse, a devotion to destruction, a thing placed under a ban. The mountain was named for the oath. The mountain carried the curse. The very ground where 200 watchers swore to abandon heaven, take human wives, corrupt the bloodline of humanity, and teach forbidden knowledge to the sons of men, was the ground that Jesus was standing on when he asked his disciples who they believed he was. That is not a coincidence. That is a strategic decision by the Son of God. Jesus did not wander to Caesarea Philippi because it was on the way to somewhere else. He brought his disciples to the base of the mountain where the war began, to the gates of hell, literally, physically, geographically, to the place where the watchers had declared war on the plan of God, and where the corruption that would eventually provoke the flood, the judgment of the fallen angels, and the entire prophetic sequence leading to the blood moon, had its origin. And standing there, at the base of that cursed mountain, in front of that cave that the ancient world believed was a doorway to the realm of the dead, Jesus asked the question that would define everything that followed. "Who do you say that I am?" And Peter answered, Matthew 16, verse 16, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Jesus responded with words that take on an entirely different weight when you understand where they were spoken. Matthew 16, verse 18. "And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not overcome it." The gates of hell. He was looking at them. The cave mouth of Caesarea Philippi, the place that bore the name of the curse the watchers swore. And Jesus said, "The gates of hell will not prevail." He was not speaking in metaphor. He was speaking in geography. He was standing at the place where the rebellion began, and declaring that the rebellion would fail, that the church he was building would be built on a foundation stronger than the oath 200 angels swore on that summit, that the gates of the underworld, the very gates he was staring at, would not hold against what he was about to unleash. And then, immediately after this declaration, Jesus did something he had never done before. Matthew 16, verse 21. From that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed, and on the third day be raised to life. From that time on, not before, from Caesarea Philippi onward, from the base of Mount Hermon onward, from the gates of hell onward, Jesus began to explain that he was going to die. The revelation of his death began at the place where the Watchers' rebellion began. The announcement that the Son of God would lay down his life was made in the shadow of the mountain where 200 angels had laid down their holiness. And the connection is not incidental. It is architectural, because the death of Jesus is the answer to the problem that the Watchers created. The Watchers corrupted the bloodline. Jesus purified it with his blood. The Watchers taught forbidden knowledge that led to destruction. Jesus offered wisdom that leads to life. The Watchers abandoned their proper dwelling and took what was not theirs. Jesus left his proper dwelling in heaven and gave what was entirely his. The entire ministry of Jesus, from incarnation to crucifixion to resurrection, is the divine counter-operation to the rebellion that began on the summit of Mount Hermon. And Jesus announced that counter-operation at the base of the mountain where the rebellion started. This is the Jesus who would later sit on the Mount of Olives and deliver the prophecy about the blood moon. And you cannot understand what he said on the Mount of Olives without understanding where he said it from, theologically. He said it from the other side of Caesarea Philippi. He said it as the one who had stood at the gates of hell and declared them insufficient. He said it as the one who knew that the war the Watchers started was entering its final phase, and that the signs in the heavens would mark the turning points of that final phase. But before we get to the Olivet discourse, there is one more event that happened near Mount Hermon that is essential to the prophetic chain. Because 6 days after Caesarea Philippi, 6 days after Peter's confession, 6 days after Jesus announced his coming death at the base of the Watchers' mountain, something happened on a high mountain that the Gospels record with awe and restraint. The Transfiguration. Matthew 17, verses 1 through 3. After 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, the brother of James, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. There he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light. Just then there appeared before them Moses and Elijah, talking with Jesus. The text does not name the mountain, but the geographical context is clear. They were in the region of Caesarea Philippi. The high mountain in that region is Hermon, and while scholars have debated this for centuries, and some have proposed Mount Tabor as an alternative, the narrative logic is devastating. Jesus took his 3 closest disciples up the mountain where 200 watchers had descended, and on that mountain he was transfigured. His face shone like the sun. His clothes became white as light. 200 angels had descended on Hermon and dimmed their glory, abandoning the light of heaven for the darkness of rebellion. And now the Son of God ascended Hermon and amplified his glory, flooding the place of the curse with the light of heaven itself. The Watchers came down in rebellion. Jesus went up in glory. The Watchers swore an oath of corruption. Jesus displayed the uncorrupted radiance of the living God. The mountain that had been marked by the cherem, the curse, the devotion to destruction, was now hosting the unveiled majesty of the one who would undo everything the curse had accomplished. And look who appeared with him: Moses and Elijah. Moses, the lawgiver who mediated the covenant that the Watchers' corruption had made necessary. And Elijah, one of only 2 human beings in all of Scripture who, like Enoch, was taken from this life without experiencing death. Elijah, the other man who walked so closely with God that the normal rules of mortality did not apply. The prophetic bookend to Enoch himself, standing on the same mountain where Enoch had received his visions of the Watchers' rebellion, now appearing in glory beside the one who would finish what the rebellion had started. And Peter, standing there in the blinding light, overwhelmed by what he was seeing, said something that the text records with almost painful honesty. Matthew 17, verse 4. "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." Peter wanted to stay. He wanted to build something permanent on that mountain. He wanted to hold the moment. And God the Father interrupted him. A cloud enveloped them, and a voice from the cloud said, "This is my Son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him. Listen to him. Not build shelters, not stay on the mountain, not try to preserve the experience. Listen. Because what Jesus was about to say in the coming days and weeks, what he would teach on the Mount of Olives about the signs in the heavens and the end of the age, required a quality of listening that Peter had not yet developed. The same quality of listening that Enoch had cultivated across 300 years of Hithalek. The kind of listening that does not just receive information, but carries its weight. And what Jesus said on the Mount of Olives, when the disciples finally asked him the question that Caesarea Philippi and the Transfiguration had been building toward, is the third layer of the blood moon revelation, the third voice in the prophetic chain, and it changes everything. Matthew 24, verse 3. As Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately. "Tell us," they said, "when will these things happen, and what will be the sign of your coming, and of the end of the age?" The sign. Singular at first. They wanted one sign, one clear indicator, one prophetic headline they could watch for. And Jesus gave them not one sign, but a sequence, a cascade, a prophetic architecture so detailed and so layered that scholars have spent 2,000 years mapping it. And embedded in that architecture, placed with the precision of a master builder who knows exactly where every stone goes, is the blood moon. But Jesus does not start with the blood moon. He starts with something else, something that reframes the entire conversation and gives you the interpretive key to everything that follows. Matthew 24, verse 8. All these are the beginning of birth pains. Birth pains, Odin in the Greek. And that word is not casual. It is not a metaphor Jesus grabbed at random to describe unpleasant things happening. Odin is a precise medical term. It describes the specific contractions of labor, the rhythmic, intensifying, increasingly frequent waves of pain that a woman experiences as she approaches delivery. And every woman who has given birth understands something about Odin that most prophecy teachers have never explained. Birth pains have a pattern. They start infrequent and mild. They increase in frequency and intensity. They build toward a crescendo. They reach a point of transition where the pain becomes nearly unbearable. And then, after the transition, comes the delivery, the birth, the emergence of new life, and here is what that means for the prophetic signs Jesus is about to describe, including the blood moon. They are not random events scattered across the timeline of history. They are contractions. They follow a pattern. They increase in frequency and intensity. The signs you are seeing in your generation are not the same signs your grandparents saw. Not because the signs are different, but because the contractions are closer together. What used to happen once a century now happens once a decade. What used to happen once a decade now happens once a year. The frequency is increasing. The intensity is increasing. The pattern is unmistakable to anyone who knows what labor looks like. And the pattern has a destination. Birth pains do not continue indefinitely. They do not plateau. They do not cycle endlessly without resolution. Birth pains end in delivery, which means the prophetic signs Jesus describes are not just warnings. They are indicators of progress toward an arrival. Something is being born, and the pain the world is experiencing, the pain that Enoch saw as the creation groaning, and Joel saw as the locust plague stripping the land bare, is the pain of a creation in labor, pushing toward the delivery of something that will make the pain comprehensible in retrospect. Romans 8, verses 22 and 23 confirms this with breathtaking precision. We know that the whole creation has been groaning as in the pains of childbirth right up to the present time. Not only so, but we ourselves, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for our adoption to sonship, the redemption of our bodies. Paul uses the same word, the same birth pain metaphor. The creation is not groaning randomly. It is groaning in labor. And what it is laboring to deliver is the redemption, the restoration, the moment when everything that the Watchers corrupted, everything that human rebellion damaged, everything that the curse of Genesis 3 set in motion, is finally, permanently, irreversibly undone. The blood moon is a contraction. It is one wave of pain in a labor that has been intensifying for millennia. And every time the moon turns red, the contraction is stronger than the last one. The delivery is closer than the last time. The groaning is louder. The frequency is higher. The creation is pushing harder. And now Jesus gives the specific sequence. And I need you to track this carefully, because the order matters. The order is not random. It is the same progressive structure that Joel used, that Enoch used, that the entire prophetic tradition follows. Warning, escalation, peak, delivery. Matthew 24, verses 4 through 14. False messiahs, wars and rumors of wars, nation rising against nation, kingdom against kingdom, famines, earthquakes. These are the beginning of birth pains. Then persecution of believers, betrayal within families, false prophets, the increase of wickedness, the love of most growing cold, and then the gospel of the kingdom preached in the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. This is not a list. This is a crescendo. Each element is more intense than the last. False messiahs are confusing but survivable. Wars are devastating but localized. Famines and earthquakes are catastrophic but recoverable. Persecution is personal and targeted. Betrayal is intimate and shattering. The love of most growing cold is civilizational. The progression moves from external to internal, from distant to intimate, from survivable to barely endurable. Just like birth pains, and then, after the birth pains have reached their peak intensity, after the sequence has moved from false messiahs, through wars, through famines, through persecution, through betrayal, through the near extinction of love itself, Jesus says this, Matthew 24, verse 29. Immediately after the distress of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from the sky, and the heavenly powers will be shaken. The sun darkened, the moon not giving its light, the stars falling, the heavenly powers shaken. This is Joel's prophecy, spoken in the voice of Jesus Christ. This is Enoch's vision of the moon altering her order, confirmed by the one who set the moon in her orbit. This is the third voice in the prophetic chain, delivering the same message, with the authority of the one who designed the entire communication system the blood moon operates within. And Jesus adds a word that Joel did not use, a word that changes the emotional register of the entire prophecy. The Greek word saleo. The heavenly powers will be shaken. Saleo means to agitate, to shake, to cause to totter, to make unstable what was previously fixed. It is the same word used in Acts 16, verse 26, to describe the earthquake that shook the foundations of the prison in Philippi and opened every door. It is the same word used in Hebrews 12, verse 26, where God says, "Once more I will shake not only the earth, but also the heavens. The heavenly powers will be saleo." Shaken, not destroyed. Shaken. There is a difference. Destruction eliminates. Shaking reveals. When you shake a structure, you do not necessarily bring it down. You expose what is unstable. You reveal what was poorly built. You force everything that is not firmly founded to detach and fall away, while what is genuinely secure remains standing. And that is what the blood moon represents in Jesus' framework. The moon going dark, the sun being hidden, the stars falling. These are the shaking of the heavenly order. The celestial system that Enoch described as an ordered, faithful, divinely maintained communication network is being shaken. Not because God has lost control of it, because God is deliberately destabilizing the old order to make way for the new one. The creation that has been groaning in labor is approaching the moment of delivery, and delivery requires the most violent contraction of all, the shaking of everything that can be shaken, so that what cannot be shaken may remain. Hebrews 12, verses 26 through 28. Once more I will shake not only the earth, but also the heavens. The words "once more" indicate the removing of what can be shaken. That is, created things, so that what cannot be shaken may remain. Therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, let us be thankful. A kingdom that cannot be shaken. That is what the birth pains are delivering. That is what the blood moon is announcing. Not the end of everything, the beginning of the only thing that lasts, the kingdom that remains after everything shakeable has been shaken loose and fallen away. And this reframes the blood moon entirely. In Enoch's vision, the blood moon was the creation's groan. In Joel's vision, it was the penultimate sign before the day of the Lord. In Jesus' teaching, it is the final contraction before the delivery of the unshakable kingdom. 3 voices, 3 layers, 1 sign, each layer adding depth and meaning that the previous voice did not fully provide. But Jesus adds one more element that neither Enoch nor Joel included. An element that transforms the blood moon from a cosmic event happening above your head into a personal event happening inside your chest. Matthew 24, verse 30. Then will appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and then all the peoples of the earth will mourn when they see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. After the blood moon, after the sun goes dark, after the stars fall, after the heavenly powers are shaken, then the Son of Man appears, not as a baby in a manger, not as a wandering teacher in Galilee, not as a prisoner before Pilate, coming on the clouds, with power, with great glory. The same Jesus who stood at the base of Mount Hermon and declared the gates of hell insufficient. The same Jesus who climbed that cursed mountain and blazed with uncreated light. The same Jesus who announced his death at the place where the Watchers' rebellion began. That Jesus, coming back, and the blood moon is the last thing the world sees before his face appears in the sky. All the peoples of the earth will mourn. The Greek word is kopto, which means to beat one's breast, to strike oneself in grief, to lament with physical violence against your own body. This is not quiet sadness. This is the kind of grief that makes you hit yourself, because the pain inside has nowhere else to go. And the peoples of the earth will experience it, because in that moment, In the space between the blood moon and the appearing of Christ, the full weight of reality will land on every human consciousness simultaneously. The truth that was avoidable before becomes unavoidable. The God who could be denied before becomes undeniable. The judgment that could be postponed before arrives. And here is the question that Jesus' prophecy forces you to answer, and it is not a theological question. It is a personal one. When the blood moon appears and the Son of Man follows, will you be mourning or will you be looking up? Because Jesus gives two responses to the same event. The peoples of the earth mourn. But in Luke's account of the same discourse, Luke 21 verse 28, Jesus says to his disciples, "When these things begin to take place, stand up and lift up your heads, because your redemption is drawing near." Stand up, lift your heads, your redemption is drawing near. The same signs that cause the nations to mourn cause the believers to lift their heads. The same blood moon that terrifies the world comforts the church. The same shaking that destabilizes everything the world has built on confirms everything the church has been promised. Because the kingdom that cannot be shaken is not threatened by the shaking. It is revealed by it. And that is the difference between watching the blood moon as a spectator and watching it as a participant. The spectator sees a terrifying, astronomical event and takes a photograph. The participant sees the final contraction before the delivery of everything God has promised, and stands up because the baby is about to be born. Your response to the blood moon is determined by your relationship to the one who comes after it. If you know him, the blood moon is the best news you have ever received. If you do not know him, it is the worst. There is no neutral position. There is no middle ground. The blood moon divides the human race into two categories, and there are only two: those who mourn and those who look up. And Jesus knew this. He knew that the blood moon prophecy was not just information about the future. It was a separator in the present, a litmus test that reveals where you stand right now, not where you will stand when the moon turns red. Because where you stand when the moon turns red is determined by where you stand tonight, by whether the Hithalik that Enoch modeled, and the Shuvu Eli that Joel delivered, and the listen to him that the Father commanded on the Mount of Transfiguration have produced in you a relationship deep enough to look up when everything else is falling down. Now, I said at the beginning of this act that the connection between Jesus and Mount Hermon was the missing piece that turns Joel's timeline into a three-dimensional picture of what is happening in the spiritual realm when the moon turns red. And I need to close that loop now. Because the blood moon is not only a sign on a prophetic timeline and a contraction in a cosmic labor. It is a battle signal. When Jesus described the heavenly powers being shaken, the Greek phrase is hai dunamis, ton auranon, the powers of the heavens. And dunamis does not only mean physical forces. In the New Testament, dunamis frequently refers to spiritual beings, angelic powers, celestial authorities, the same category of beings that the Watchers belonged to before they fell. Ephesians 6 verse 12. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. The powers of this dark world, the spiritual forces in the heavenly realms. These are the same dunamis that Jesus says will be shaken when the blood moon appears. The shaking of the heavenly powers is not just a physical event affecting the orbits of celestial bodies. It is a spiritual event affecting the positions of spiritual beings who have held authority in the heavenly realms since the rebellion on Mount Hermon. The Watchers descended on Hermon and established a beachhead of rebellion in the heavenly order. They corrupted the earth below and disrupted the harmony of the heavens above. And for 5,000 years, the consequences of that rebellion have been compounding. The spiritual forces that the Watchers unleashed, the principalities and powers that Ephesians describes, have been operating in the heavenly realms, influencing nations, corrupting systems, darkening minds, and opposing the plan of God with a persistence that only beings who have been waging war for millennia could sustain. And the blood moon signals that their time is running out. The shaking of the heavenly powers is not a metaphor. It is the destabilization of the spiritual authority structures that the Watchers' rebellion established. The moon turning red is not just the creation groaning. It is the creation responding to a shift in the balance of spiritual power. The principalities are losing their grip. The powers are being shaken from their positions. The heavenly order that has been corrupted since the descent on Hermon is being reconfigured, and the visible sign of that invisible reconfiguration is the blood on the face of the moon. This is what Jesus understood when he stood at Caesarea Philippi and declared that the gates of hell would not prevail. He was not making a general statement about the church's survival. He was issuing a strategic declaration at the geographic origin of the Watchers' rebellion that the war they started was entering its final phase. And the blood moon, the sign that Enoch saw and Joel placed on a timeline, and Jesus connected to his own return, is the visible marker of that final phase. The war is not over, but the outcome is decided. The gates of hell do not prevail. The heavenly powers are shaken. The moon turns red, not because the enemy is winning, but because the enemy is being displaced. The groaning of creation is not the groan of defeat. It is the groan of labor. And what is being born through the blood and the fire and the billows of smoke that Joel described and Jesus confirmed is the kingdom that cannot be shaken. And the question for you right now is not whether you believe this is true. The question is whether you are living as though it is true. Whether the birth pains you see in the world around you, the increasing frequency and intensity of the signs Jesus described, are producing in you the response Jesus prescribed. Stand up, lift your head, your redemption is drawing near. Or are you living as though the shaking is random, as though the signs are coincidental, as though the moon turning red is a physics lesson and not a prophecy, as though the war that started on Mount Hermon has nothing to do with the pressure you feel in your spirit right now, the heaviness, the confusion, the sense that something is shifting in the atmosphere, that you cannot name but you cannot ignore. It is shifting. The heavenly powers are being shaken. And the blood moon is the visible sign that the shaking has reached the point of no return. The final contraction, the last warning. The ultimate signal before the Son of Man appears in the sky, and every question that has ever been asked about the meaning of existence is answered in a single moment by a single face. Jesus, coming on the clouds, with power, with great glory, after the blood moon and before the dawn of the kingdom that has no end, That is the third voice. Enoch saw the groan. Joel mapped the timeline. Jesus identified the destination. 3 voices, 1 message, building across 5,000 years toward a conclusion that none of them could deliver alone, but that together they present with a clarity that leaves no room for ambiguity. But the prophetic chain is not complete, because between Jesus' ascension and his return, between the Olivet discourse and the actual appearance of the blood moon in the sky, there is a gap, a long gap, 2,000 years and counting. And during that gap, 2 more voices were given the task of explaining what the blood moon means for the people who live in the waiting, the people who exist between the promise and the fulfillment, the people who must navigate the birth pains without yet seeing the baby. Those voices are Peter and Paul, the apostles who took Joel's prophecy and Jesus' teaching and translated them into instructions for the church, not prophecy for the future, but guidance for the present. Not what will happen, but how to live while it is happening. And what Peter said on the day of Pentecost about Joel's blood moon prophecy, and what Paul wrote to the churches about the groaning of creation and the shaking of the heavens, adds a dimension to the blood moon that neither Enoch nor Joel, nor even Jesus, fully articulated. The dimension of lived experience, the dimension of how you endure the contractions, how you stand when the heavenly powers are being shaken, how you keep your head lifted when everything around you is falling. That is where we go next. And if you have been with me this far, if Enoch's walk and Joel's whisper and Jesus' promise have settled into your spirit with a weight that feels like something you are supposed to carry, then the next section is where the weight becomes practical, where the prophecy becomes a way of life, where the blood moon stops being something you watch and becomes something you prepare for. And the preparation is not what you think it is. 50 days after Jesus was crucified. 50 days after the earth shook and the rocks split, and the curtain of the temple was torn from top to bottom. 50 days after the Son of God breathed his last on a Roman cross, and the sky went dark in the middle of the afternoon, which, if you have been listening carefully, you recognize as the same celestial response that Enoch described, that Joel prophesied, and that Jesus confirmed. The sun darkened. At the crucifixion, the luminaries responded to what was happening on the earth. The cosmic communication system registered the death of its creator, and the heavens went dark because the weight of what was occurring on that hill outside Jerusalem was heavier than anything that had happened on the earth since the Watchers descended on Mount Hermon. 50 days after that, 120 people were gathered in an upper room in Jerusalem, and the Spirit of God fell on them like fire. And Peter, the same Peter who had confessed Jesus as the Messiah at the base of Mount Hermon, the same Peter who had wanted to build shelters on the Mount of Transfiguration, the same Peter who had denied Jesus 3 times on the night of his arrest, stood up in front of a crowd of thousands and opened his mouth, and the first thing he did was quote Joel, Acts 2, verses 14 through 21. Then Peter stood up with the 11, raised his voice, and addressed the crowd. "Fellow Jews and all of you who live in Jerusalem, let me explain this to you. Listen carefully to what I say. These people are not drunk, as you suppose. It's only 9 in the morning. No, this is what was spoken by the prophet Joel. In the last days, God says, I will pour out my Spirit on all people. Your sons and daughters will prophesy. Your young men will see visions. Your old men will dream dreams. Even on my servants, both men and women, I will pour out my Spirit in those days, and they will prophesy. I will show wonders in the heaven above, and signs on the earth below, blood and fire, and billows of smoke. The sun will be turned to darkness, and the moon to blood before the coming of the great and glorious day of the Lord. And everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved." Peter quoted Joel almost word for word. He stood in the middle of the Spirit, falling on all flesh, and said, "This is that. This is the fulfillment." This is what Joel was describing when he wrote about the outpouring. The prophetic timeline that Joel constructed, the sequence that runs from locust plague through the even now, through the outpouring, through the blood moon to the day of the Lord, that timeline is now in motion. The outpouring has begun. The Spirit has fallen. The next signal on Joel's timeline, after the outpouring, is the wonders in the heavens. The blood and fire and smoke. The sun darkened. The moon turned to blood. And here is what Peter did that changes how you understand the blood moon. He placed you on the timeline. Joel constructed the sequence. Jesus confirmed it and added the birth pains framework. But Peter stood up on the day of Pentecost and told you where you are standing in relation to that sequence. You are after the outpouring. You are before the blood moon. You are in the space between Joel 2:28 and Joel 2:31. The Spirit has been poured out. The celestial signs have not yet reached their final intensity. And every day you live, every breath you take, every decision you make, you are making it in the gap between the already and the not yet. The Spirit has already been poured out. The blood moon has not yet delivered its final message. The day of the Lord has not yet arrived. And you are living in the middle of an unfinished prophetic sequence, breathing air that is charged with both the presence of the Spirit and the approach of the signs, both the comfort of the outpouring and the weight of what is coming, both the grace of the even now and the urgency of the birth pains that are increasing in frequency and intensity all around you. That is your address on the prophetic timeline. That is where you are standing right now. Between the upper room and the blood moon, between the fire on the heads of 120 believers and the fire in the sky that Joel said would accompany the darkening of the sun and the turning of the moon to blood. And Peter wants you to know exactly where you are so that you can live accordingly. Not in ignorance, not in panic, in awareness, in preparation, in the kind of readiness that comes from understanding the times and knowing what you are supposed to do. And Peter does something else in his Pentecost sermon that most people skip because they are focused on the spectacular elements, the tongues of fire, the speaking in other languages, the crowd's amazement. Peter connects Joel's blood moon to a person, not to a timeline, not to a chart, to a person. Acts 2, verses 22 through 24. Fellow Israelites, listen to this. Jesus of Nazareth was a man accredited by God to you by miracles, wonders, and signs, which God did among you through him, as you yourselves know. This man was handed over to you by God's deliberate plan and foreknowledge, and you, with the help of wicked men, put him to death by nailing him to the cross. But God raised him from the dead, freeing him from the agony of death, because it was impossible for death to keep its hold on him. Peter quotes Joel's blood moon prophecy, and then immediately pivots to the death and resurrection of Jesus. He does not leave the blood moon floating in prophetic space as a future event disconnected from present reality. He anchors it to the cross. He says the same God who promised the blood moon is the God who planned the crucifixion. The same prophetic sequence that ends with the moon turning red passes through the cross on its way there. And the cross is not a detour on the timeline. It is the pivot point. Everything before the cross pointed toward it. Everything after the cross flows from it. The blood moon itself is a consequence of what happened on the cross, because the cross is where the war that started on Mount Hermon was decisively won, even though the final battle has not yet been fought. And then Peter lands the punch, Acts 2, verse 36. Therefore let all Israel be assured of this. God has made this Jesus, whom you crucified, both Lord and Messiah. Both Lord and Messiah, Kurios and Christos, the one who has authority over everything, including the moon, and the one who was anointed to fulfill every prophecy, including Joel's. Peter is saying the blood moon is not an impersonal cosmic event. It belongs to someone. It answers to someone. It operates under the authority of someone. And that someone is the same Jesus who was crucified and raised, and who is now seated at the right hand of God with all authority in heaven and on earth. Which means, when you see the blood moon, you are not seeing an omen. You are seeing a message from a person who knows your name, a person who died for you before you were born, a person who is orchestrating the prophetic timeline, not as a detached administrator, but as someone with skin in the game, literally, because the skin that was torn on the cross is the same skin that will be visible when he appears in the clouds after the moon turns red. Peter turned the blood moon from a prophecy into a relationship, and that is the fourth voice's unique contribution to the chain. Enoch gave us the cosmic architecture, Joel gave us the timeline, Jesus gave us the destination, Peter gave us the person at the center of it all and said, everything you are watching in the sky is about him. It comes from him. It leads to him. It will be resolved by him. And your response to it should be directed toward him. Acts 2, verse 37. When the people heard this, they were cut to the heart, and said to Peter and the other apostles, Brothers, what shall we do? Cut to the heart. The Greek word is katanuso, and it means to pierce deeply, to stab, to penetrate with sharp pain. It is used only this one time in the entire New Testament. A word so specific, so visceral, that the Holy Spirit reserved it for this single moment. The moment when a crowd of people heard the connection between the blood moon prophecy and the person of Jesus Christ, and felt something rupture inside them. Not intellectual agreement, not theological interest, a piercing, a wound, the kind of wound that only truth can make when it hits a place you have been protecting. Brothers, what shall we do? That is the question the blood moon is designed to provoke. Not what does this mean for the prophetic timeline. Not when is the next tetrad. Not how does this correlate with geopolitical events in the Middle East. What shall we do? It is a question of response, a question of action, a question that assumes the information has already landed and now requires a decision. And Peter's answer is the simplest, most direct, most devastating sentence in the book of Acts, Acts 2, verse 38. Repent and be baptized, every one of you, in the name of Jesus Christ, for the forgiveness of your sins, and you will receive the gift of the Holy Spirit. Repent. There it is again. The same shuvu hilai that Joel whispered in the middle of the advancing army. The same turn around and walk the other way that God offered when the locusts had stripped the land bare and the heavens were trembling. Peter does not offer a new instruction. He offers the same instruction that has been embedded in the prophetic sequence from the beginning. The blood moon says, judgment is approaching. The even now says, there is still time. And the instruction, the same instruction every time, is repent. Turn around. Come back, not to a religion or a system or a denomination, to a person, to Jesus, to the one the blood moon belongs to. Now, Peter established where you are on the timeline and who the blood moon belongs to. But it is Paul who explains what it feels like to live in the gap. What happens to a human being, to a church, to a creation that exists between the outpouring and the blood moon, between the already and the not yet, between the first contraction and the delivery. Because the gap is not empty. The gap is not a waiting room where nothing happens until the main event arrives. The gap is where the groaning lives. And Paul understood the groaning better than any other writer in the New Testament, because Paul lived inside it. He carried it in his body. He described it with a precision that tells you he was not theorizing. He was testifying. Romans 8, verse 18. I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. Not worth comparing. Paul does not say the sufferings are insignificant. He does not minimize the pain. He says the glory that is coming is so far beyond the suffering that the two cannot be placed on the same scale. They are incommensurable. The suffering is real. The glory is realer. And the blood moon, the sign that marks the transition from one to the other, is the moment when the scale tips permanently. Romans 8, verse 19. For the creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed. And here is where Paul uses a word that deserves the same treatment we gave to Hithalek and Gazam and Odin. The Greek word for eager expectation is apokaradokia, and apokaradokia is one of the most physically descriptive words in the entire New Testament. It is a compound word. Apo means away from, kara means the head, dokeo means to watch, to look, to observe. Put them together, and you get a word that literally means to watch with the head turned away from everything else, to crane your neck forward, to strain toward something with such intensity that you physically turn away from what is behind you, because what is in front of you has captured your entire attention. The creation is in a state of apokaradokia. The physical universe, the mountains and the oceans, and the atmosphere, and the celestial bodies, all of it is craning forward, straining toward something, leaning into the future with the intensity of a woman in the final stage of labor who has stopped caring about anything except the delivery. The creation does not care about your stock portfolio. The creation does not care about the news cycle. The creation does not care about the things that consume your daily attention. The creation has turned its head away from all of it and is staring with fixed, unblinking, full-body intensity at the moment when the children of God will be revealed. And the blood moon is what the creation's apokaradokia looks like when it becomes visible. The moon turning red is the creation craning its neck. The heavens darkening is the creation leaning forward. The celestial order being shaken is the creation straining toward the delivery with everything it has. The signs in the sky are not threats. They are the visible expression of a creation that is so eager for what is coming that it cannot hold still any more, that reframes everything. Because most people look at the blood moon and feel dread. The sky is wrong. Something terrible is happening. The end is near. But Paul says the creation is not dreading what is coming. The creation is straining toward it, craning its neck, turning its head away from everything else to stare at the approaching glory, with an eagerness that the English language does not have a single word to express, which is why the Greek had to invent apokaradokia. If the creation is eager, why are you afraid? That is not a rhetorical question. That is a diagnostic. If the blood moon fills you with dread instead of anticipation, if the signs in the heavens make you anxious instead of hopeful, if the shaking of the heavenly powers makes you want to hide instead of stand up and lift your head, then something in your relationship with God needs attention, because the creation knows what is coming, and it is leaning into it. And the creation does not have the Holy Spirit. The creation does not have the promise of redemption. The creation does not have the assurance that what cannot be shaken will remain. You do. And if the creation can lean into the blood moon with apokaradokia while carrying none of those promises, how much more should you, who carry all of them, be able to face the signs with something other than fear? Romans 8, verse 22 and 23. We know that the whole creation has been groaning as in the pains of childbirth right up to the present time. Not only so, but we ourselves, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for our adoption to sonship, the redemption of our bodies. Not only the creation, we ourselves. Paul says the groaning is not out there. It is in here, inside you. The same birth pains that are shaking the heavens and turning the moon red are operating inside every believer who has received the first fruits of the Spirit. You feel them. The heaviness you cannot explain. The longing that nothing in this world satisfies. The ache for something you have never experienced, but somehow know you were made for. The sense that you are between two worlds, and fully at home in neither. That is the groaning. And it is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It is a sign that the same Spirit who was poured out at Pentecost, the same Spirit that Joel prophesied and Peter identified, is alive inside you and is responding to the same prophetic timeline that the creation is responding to. You are groaning because the Spirit in you recognizes the contractions. You are aching because the Spirit in you knows the delivery is close. You are restless because the Spirit in you has the same apokaradokia that the creation has, the same craning forward, the same turning away from everything temporary to stare at the approaching glory. And Paul says the appropriate response to this groaning is not to suppress it, not to medicate it, not to distract yourself from it with entertainment or busyness or even religious activity. The appropriate response is to wait, but not passive waiting, eager waiting, expectant waiting. The kind of waiting that a woman in labor does, which is not sitting quietly in a chair, but actively enduring each contraction with the knowledge that every wave of pain brings the delivery closer. Romans 8, verse 25. But if we hope for what we do not yet have, we wait for it patiently. The Greek word for patiently is hupomone. And hupomone does not mean what the English word patience suggests. Patience in English sounds passive. It sounds like sitting still. It sounds like tolerating discomfort without complaint. But hupomone means to remain under, to stay beneath a weight without being crushed by it, to endure pressure, not by escaping it, but by outlasting it. Hupomone is the word for a soldier who holds his position under fire. A runner who keeps going when every muscle is screaming to stop. A woman who breathes through the contraction instead of fighting it, because she knows that fighting the pain makes it worse, and breathing through it brings the baby closer. Hupomone is how you live between Pentecost and the blood moon. Not in panic, not in denial, not in the frantic prophetic speculation that characterizes so much of the blood moon conversation on the internet. In hupomone, in the steady, weight-bearing, contraction-enduring, position-holding patience of someone who knows what is being delivered and has decided that no amount of pain in the process will make them abandon their post. And I need to be specific about what hupomone looks like practically, because it is easy to hear a Greek word study and nod along and never translate it into Tuesday afternoon. Hupomone looks like waking up on a morning when your body hurts and your bank account is empty and the news is terrifying and the political situation is unstable and the church you attend feels more like a social club than a hospital for the dying, and choosing to pray anyway. Not because you feel like praying, because the weight is on you and you have decided to remain under it rather than crawl out from beneath it. Hupomone looks like reading your Bible when nothing in it seems to be speaking to your situation. When the promises feel distant and the prophecies feel academic and the Psalms feel like they were written for someone with more faith than you. And you read anyway. Because hupomone is not powered by feeling. It is powered by position. You remain under the weight, not because the weight feels good, but because you know what it is producing. And what it is producing, according to Paul, is an eternal glory that far outweighs the suffering. Hupomone looks like staying married, when staying married is the hardest thing you have ever done. Staying faithful when faithfulness has cost you everything the world says you deserve. Staying in the church when the church has wounded you in ways that make you want to never walk through those doors again. Staying on your knees when your knees ache and your prayers seem to hit the ceiling and bounce back, and the blood moon videos on the internet are telling you everything is about to end, and you are not sure whether that terrifies you or comforts you. That is hupomone. And it is not glamorous, it is not cinematic, it will never trend on social media. But it is the exact posture that the prophetic chain has been building toward across 5,000 years of revelation. Enoch walked, that was his hupomone. 300 years of continuous walking beneath the weight of visions that would have crushed a lesser vessel. Joel whispered, even now, that was God's hupomone toward his people, an endurance of their rebellion that defied every standard of justice and kept the door open when the door should have been sealed. Jesus endured the cross. Hebrews 12 verse 2 uses the same word. He endured, hupomone. He remained under the weight of the sin of the entire human race and did not crawl out from beneath it. And Peter and Paul, beaten and imprisoned and shipwrecked and abandoned, remained under the weight of apostolic calling and held their position until the end. The blood moon is coming, and the only preparation that matters is hupomone. Not prophetic knowledge, not theological sophistication, not a bunker full of supplies, the capacity to remain under the weight of what is coming without being crushed by it. The capacity to hold your position when the heavenly powers are being shaken, and the ground beneath you feels like it is moving, and everything you thought was stable turns out to be shakeable. And Paul is not speaking abstractly. Paul wrote Romans from a life that had been shattered and rebuilt multiple times by the groaning he describes, shipwrecked, beaten, stoned, imprisoned, abandoned by friends, opposed by the religious establishment, living in constant danger. And in the middle of all of it, writing with the calm certainty of a man who has found hupomone and discovered that it holds. 2 Corinthians 4, verses 16 through 18. Therefore we do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen, since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. Fix our eyes on what is unseen. That is apokeradokia applied to daily life. Turn your head away from the visible and stare at the invisible. Crane your neck toward what is coming, not toward what is crumbling. And Paul calls the troubles light and momentary, not because they feel light and momentary, but because compared to the eternal glory they are producing, they register on a completely different scale. A scale that only becomes visible when you have been groaning long enough to develop the spiritual depth perception that can see past the blood moon to what lies on the other side of it. Now, there is one more passage from this apostolic tradition that completes the picture, and it is the passage that tells you, specifically and practically, what the shaking is designed to accomplish in your life. Not in the cosmos, not in the prophetic timeline. In you. Hebrews 12, verses 25 through 29. See to it that you do not refuse him who speaks. If they did not escape when they refused him who warned them on earth, how much less will we, if we turn away from him who warns us from heaven? At that time, his voice shook the earth. But now he has promised, once more I will shake not only the earth, but also the heavens. The words, once more, indicate the removing of what can be shaken. That is, created things, so that what cannot be shaken may remain. Therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, let us be thankful, and so worship God acceptably, with reverence and awe, for our God is a consuming fire. The removing of what can be shaken, so that what cannot be shaken may remain. That is the purpose of the blood moon season. That is what the birth pains are accomplishing. That is why the heavenly powers are being destabilized, and the celestial order is being disrupted, and the creation is groaning with increasing intensity. Not to destroy, to reveal, to strip away everything that is temporary, so that what is eternal becomes unmistakable. And this operates at every level simultaneously. At the cosmic level, the shaking removes the old heavens and earth to make way for the new. At the national level, the shaking exposes which kingdoms are built on sand and which are built on rock. At the church level, the shaking separates the churches that are built on the genuine foundation of Christ's from the ones that are built on cultural relevance or emotional experience or theological fashion. And at the personal level, the shaking reaches into your life and rattles everything that is not secured to the foundation, and asks the question that the blood moon is ultimately asking every human being on the planet. What in your life cannot be shaken? What would remain if everything shakeable was removed? If your career was shaken, would your identity survive? If your health was shaken, would your faith survive? If your relationships were shaken, would your joy survive? If your theology was shaken, if every comfortable doctrine and every familiar framework and every confident assumption about how the end times are supposed to unfold was rattled to its foundations, would your relationship with God survive? Or would it turn out that your relationship with God was built on the theology rather than on the person, and that when the theology was shaken, the relationship shook with it? The shaking is not punishment. The shaking is mercy, because it is far better to discover what is shakeable now, while the even now is still echoing, while the Shuvu Eli is still available, while the door is still open, than to discover it when the blood moon fills the sky, and there is no time left to rebuild. This is what the writer of Hebrews means when he says, "Let us be thankful. Thankful for the shaking. Thankful for the disruption. Thankful for the birth pains that are intensifying all around us, because every contraction is removing something that would not survive the delivery anyway. And it is far better to let it go now, voluntarily, in the context of grace and repentance and the still open door, than to have it ripped away at the moment of delivery, when the only thing that matters is the only thing that remains." And the writer of Hebrews closes with a phrase that ties every thread of this prophetic chain together in a single image. Our God is a consuming fire, the same fire that fell at Pentecost, the same fire that Joel said would accompany the blood and the smoke, the same fire that Jesus said he came to cast on the earth. God is not just the author of the prophetic timeline. He is the fire that runs through it. The fire at Pentecost was grace. The fire at the blood moon is judgment. But it is the same fire, produced by the same God, serving the same purpose, consuming everything that is not of him, so that everything that is of him can be fully and finally revealed. And you are standing in the path of that fire right now, between the fire of Pentecost that fell behind you and the fire of the blood moon that is approaching in front of you. And the fire is not your enemy. The fire is your refiner. It is burning away what cannot survive the kingdom, so that what remains of you is the you that was designed to live forever. The you that was created in the image of God before the watchers corrupted the earth. The you that the creation is craning its neck to see revealed. The children of God revealed. That is what the creation is waiting for with a Pokaradokia. Not the blood moon. The blood moon is just the signal. The creation is waiting for you. For the moment when the people of God stop being hidden inside mortal bodies and broken circumstances and partial understanding, and step into the full inheritance that was promised before the foundation of the world. And you get there not by decoding the prophetic timeline, not by calculating the dates of lunar eclipses, not by stockpiling survival supplies or building bunkers or arguing on the internet about whether the rapture is pre-tribulation or post-tribulation. You get there by hupomone, by remaining under the weight, by breathing through the contractions, by walking the Hitholic that Enoch walked, by heeding the Shuvu Eli that Joel delivered, by listening to the voice on the mountain that said, "This is my son, listen to him," by standing up and lifting your head, because your redemption is drawing near. Peter gave you your position on the timeline. Paul gave you the vocabulary for what you are feeling, and the strategy for how to endure it. And together, they form the fourth voice in the prophetic chain that says, the blood moon is not something to be studied from a distance. It is something to be lived through, with your eyes open and your feet planted, and your heart turned toward the God who is speaking through the heavens to anyone who will listen. And there is one voice left, one final layer, the voice that takes everything Enoch saw, and Joel prophesied, and Jesus confirmed, and Peter applied, and Paul endured, and weaves it all together into a single, unified, cinematic vision of what happens when the blood moon finally appears in its fullest expression. When the sixth seal is broken, and the sky rolls up like a scroll, and the moon turns the color of blood over a world that has run out of time, and out of warnings, and out of the patience it mistook for permission. The voice of John, the revelation, and what John saw when the sixth seal opened, is not what most people think they know about the blood moon in Revelation. Because John did not just see a red moon in the sky. He saw what was happening on the earth beneath it. He saw the response. He saw the kings and the generals and the rich and the powerful hiding in caves and calling out to the mountains to fall on them. And he saw something else, something that most blood moon teachers never reach because they stop at the spectacle and never get to the sanctuary. John saw the multitude, the uncountable crowd from every nation and tribe and people and language, standing before the throne, dressed in white, holding palm branches, and singing with a volume that shook the foundations of heaven itself. And the question the elder asked John about that crowd is the question I am going to ask you at the end of this study. The question that the entire prophetic chain, from Enoch to Revelation, has been building toward. Not who are they, but where did they come from, and what did they come through to get there? That is the final act, and it is the one that will either break you open or leave you exactly where you are. There is no middle ground, because Revelation does not allow spectators. It demands a verdict, and the blood moon is the last piece of evidence before the verdict is delivered. We are almost there, and everything you have heard across these hours has been preparation for what comes next. The sixth seal, the great multitude, the question of the elder, and the answer that changes the meaning of the blood moon from a sign in the sky to a door in the wall of the world that you can either walk through or watch close. One more act, and then the altar call, that is not an altar call, but a verdict that has been building since a man named Enoch took his first step alongside God 5,000 years ago and never stopped walking. John was old when he saw it, exiled on a rock in the Aegean Sea called Patmos, separated from every church he had planted, separated from every believer he had mentored, separated from the world that had tried to kill him and failed, because according to the early church tradition, they had thrown John into boiling oil in Rome, and he had walked out of it alive. The last surviving apostle, the last living man who had physically touched Jesus with his hands, who had leaned against his chest at the Last Supper, who had stood at the foot of the cross and watched him die, who had run to the empty tomb and seen the linen wrappings lying flat where a body should have been, and believed before anyone explained it to him. John had seen more than any other human being alive. He had seen the transfiguration on the mountain. He had seen the darkness fall at the crucifixion. He had seen the resurrected Christ standing on the shore of Galilee cooking breakfast. He had seen the Spirit fall at Pentecost. He had seen Peter preach and 3,000 souls cut to the heart. He had watched the church be born and grow and spread and suffer and endure. He had buried friends. He had survived persecutions. He had carried the weight of apostolic authority for decades longer than any of his peers. Peter was dead. Paul was dead. James was dead. John was the last one left. And Rome had decided that if they could not kill him, they would isolate him, put him on a rock, let him die of old age with the sound of the sea and the silence of exile as his only companions. And it was there, on that rock, in that silence, in the solitude that Rome intended as punishment and God repurposed as preparation, that John received the final vision, the capstone of the prophetic chain, the last voice in a sequence that had begun with a man named Enoch walking with God 5,000 years earlier. Revelation 1 verse 10. On the Lord's day I was in the Spirit, and I heard behind me a loud voice like a trumpet. In the Spirit, the same Spirit that Joel had prophesied would be poured out on all flesh, the same Spirit that had fallen at Pentecost, the same Spirit that Paul said was groaning inside every believer as the creation groaned outside them. That Spirit now carried John beyond the boundaries of ordinary perception and into a realm where time and sequence and physical limitation no longer applied. And what John saw in that realm, what the Spirit showed him across the 22 chapters that would become the book of Revelation, was the complete, final, unedited version of what Enoch had glimpsed and Joel had placed on a timeline, and Jesus had confirmed, and Peter and Paul had taught the church to endure. And the blood moon appears in the sixth seal, Revelation 6 verse 12 through 17. I watched as he opened the sixth seal. There was a great earthquake. The sun turned black like sackcloth made of goat hair. The whole moon turned blood red, and the stars in the sky fell to earth, as figs drop from a fig tree when shaken by a strong wind. The heavens receded like a scroll being rolled up, and every mountain and island was removed from its place. Then the kings of the earth, the princes, the generals, the rich, the mighty, and everyone else, both slave and free, hid in caves and among the rocks of the mountains. They called to the mountains and rocks, "Fall on us and hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath has come, and who can withstand it?" There it is, the full picture, every element that every voice in the prophetic chain has described, gathered into a single scene. The earthquake that shakes the earth, the sun going black, the moon turning the color of blood, the stars falling, the heavens rolling up, every mountain and island moved, and the response of humanity, not worship, not repentance, not the Shuvu Eli that Joel offered, hiding, running, calling to the rocks to fall on them and cover them from the face of the one sitting on the throne. And I need you to feel the weight of what John is describing here, because it is easy to read Revelation as spectacle, as cosmic cinema, as a sequence of extraordinary images that impress the imagination, but remain safely distant from your experience. But John was not watching a movie. John was standing inside the vision. The ground was shaking beneath his feet. The sky was disintegrating above his head, and the people he was watching, the kings and generals, and rich and mighty, and slave and free, were not characters in a story. They were every category of human being, every social class, every power structure, every person on earth, from the most powerful to the most powerless, unified for the first and only time in human history by a single shared experience. Terror. And what are they terrified of? Not the earthquake, not the blood moon, not the falling stars. Those are just the symptoms. What terrifies them is the face of him who sits on the throne. The prosopon, the Greek word for face, of the one they have been avoiding, denying, ignoring, rationalizing away, explaining with alternative theories, managing with religious substitutes, and suppressing with every tool available to the human capacity for self-deception. That face is now visible, and there is nowhere left to hide from it. And the kings do not argue. The generals do not strategize. The rich do not negotiate. The mighty do not fight. They run. They hide. They beg inanimate rocks to fall on them. The people who spent their entire lives building empires and commanding armies and accumulating wealth and projecting strength now want mountains to bury them alive. Because being buried alive is preferable to being seen by the face that is appearing behind the blood moon. This is what the blood moon has been building toward across the entire prophetic chain. Not the red color in the sky, not the astronomical event, the face behind it, the person behind the sign, the same person Peter identified on the day of Pentecost, both Lord and Messiah, the same Jesus who stood at Caesarea Philippi and declared the gates of hell insufficient, the same Jesus who was transfigured on Mount Hermon and blazed with light that 200 watchers had tried to extinguish by descending that same mountain in rebellion. That face, behind that moon, coming through that sky, and no amount of wealth or power or military strength or political connection or social status can do what a single mountain rock can do, which is block the view, hide the face, buy 5 more seconds of the denial that has been masquerading as a sophistication for an entire civilization's worth of human history. And notice who is hiding. Not just the wicked, not just the enemies of God. Everyone else, both slave and free. John is explicit. The blood moon separates no one by category. It does not spare the poor, because they suffered. It does not exempt the educated because they were thoughtful. It does not protect the religious because they attended services. When the 6th seal opens, the only distinction that matters is the one Jesus identified on the Mount of Olives. Those who mourn and those who look up. Those who hide and those who stand. And John knows this because John was told decades earlier by Jesus himself what to do when these things begin to take place. Stand up, lift your head. Your redemption is drawing near. John had been carrying that instruction for 60 years, through the fall of Jerusalem, through the destruction of the temple, through the persecution of Nero, through the exile to Patmos, through every death and every loss and every year of waiting that stretched the promise thinner and thinner until it seemed like it would snap. And now, in the vision, John watches the promise come true. The signs appear. The heavens shake. The face is revealed. And the question John has been holding for 6 decades is finally, irrevocably, permanently answered. It was all true. Every word, every promise, every prophecy, Every vision from Enoch to Joel to Jesus to Peter to Paul. All of it pointing to this moment. The moment when the blood moon fills the sky and the face of Christ appears behind it, and human history reaches the point that the creation has been craning its neck toward since the garden. But John does not stop at the sixth seal, and this is where Revelation does something that most blood moon teachers have never shown you, because the expected next step, after the kings are hiding, and the mountains are shaking, and the moon is red, is the seventh seal, the final judgment. The end, the curtain coming down. But that is not what happens next. What happens next is chapter 7. And chapter 7 is the most important chapter in the book of Revelation, for understanding what the blood moon actually means for you personally. Because chapter 7 does not continue the judgment. Chapter 7 interrupts it. Revelation 7 verse 1. After this I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding back the 4 winds of the earth, to prevent any wind from blowing on the land, or on the sea, or on any tree. Holding back. The judgment pauses. After the 6th seal, after the blood moon, after the earthquake, and the falling stars, and the hiding kings, the 4 angels at the 4 corners of the earth hold back the winds. The destruction that was unleashed is momentarily, miraculously, impossibly restrained. The 7th seal does not open. The finale does not arrive. Instead, there is a pause. And if you have been tracking the structure of this study, you recognize what is happening. Because this is not the first time the prophetic chain has included a pause in the middle of an advancing judgment. Joel did the same thing. The army was advancing. The earth was shaking. The heavens were trembling. And in the middle of the advance, God whispered, even now, "Return to me." The pause in Joel 2 is the same structural move as the pause in Revelation 7. God interrupting his own judgment to create space for one more act of mercy. And what happens in that space is the vision that changes everything. Revelation 7 verses 9 through 10. After this I looked, and there before me was a great multitude that no one could count, from every nation, tribe, people, and language, standing before the throne and before the Lamb. They were wearing white robes and were holding palm branches in their hands, and they cried out in a loud voice, "Salvation belongs to our God, who sits on the throne, and to the Lamb." A great multitude that no one could count, after the blood moon, after the earthquake, after the 6th seal. John looks up and sees not the terrified kings hiding in caves. He sees an uncountable crowd from every nation on earth standing. Not hiding, standing before the throne, not running from it. Wearing white, not covered in dust and shame. Holding palm branches, not clawing at rocks. And shouting, not whimpering. Salvation belongs to our God. The same throne that the kings were begging mountains to hide them from is the throne that this multitude is standing before with joy. The same face that terrified the generals is the face that this crowd is looking at and singing to. The same blood moon that sent the rich and mighty scrambling into caves is the blood moon that these people apparently walked through and came out the other side of wearing white. Who are these people? Where did they come from? How did they get from the blood moon to the throne room? What do they know that the kings and generals did not? And before the elder answers, I need you to notice something about the structure of Revelation at this point. Because between the 6th seal in chapter 6 and the continuation of the seal sequence in chapter 8, John inserts chapter 7. And the opening of chapter 8 contains the most extraordinary single verse in the entire book, Revelation 8, verse 1. When he opened the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven for about half an hour. Silence after the earthquake, after the blood moon, after the stars falling, and the heavens rolling up, and the kings hiding, and the multitude singing. Silence. Half an hour of it, in a heaven that, according to everything else John has described, is a place of continuous worship, continuous praise, continuous sound. The four living creatures never stop saying, "Holy, holy, holy." The 24 elders never stop casting their crowns before the throne. Heaven is the loudest place in existence, and for half an hour it goes completely silent. Why? Because the weight of what is about to happen is too heavy for sound. The seventh seal does not arrive with a crash. It arrives with a hush. The way a courtroom goes silent before a verdict. The way a hospital ward goes quiet when a family gathers around a bed. The way the world holds its breath when something so significant is occurring that even the angels, who have been singing since the day they were created, stop singing and stand still. That silence is the emotional center of the entire book of Revelation. It is the pause between the blood moon and the final judgment. The breath between the contraction and the delivery. The space in which everything that has been building across 5,000 years of prophetic revelation reaches its maximum compression before the release. And in that silence, the only thing that can be heard is the weight of every prayer that has ever been prayed by every saint who has ever lived, rising like incense before the throne. Revelation 8, verse 4. The smoke of the incense, together with the prayers of God's people, went up before God from the angel's hand. Your prayers are in that silence. Every prayer you have ever prayed that felt like it hit the ceiling and came back empty. Every desperate cry in the middle of the night. Every whispered Shuvu Eli that you directed toward a God who seemed silent. Those prayers did not evaporate. They accumulated. They were held, and in the half-hour of silence that follows the blood moon, they rise before the throne as incense, and they are the last sound heaven hears before the final judgment begins. Your prayers matter more than you know, and the silence after the blood moon is the proof. But I am getting ahead of the sequence, because before the seventh seal, and before the silence, John sees the multitude, and the elder asks the question, and John does not have to wonder, because one of the 24 elders standing around the throne turns to John and asks him the question that the entire prophetic chain has been building toward, the question that Enoch's walk was preparing, that Joel's timeline was constructing, that Jesus' teaching was pointing at, that Peter's Pentecost sermon was answering, that Paul's hupomone was training people to survive long enough to face. Revelation 7, verse 13. Then one of the elders asked me, "These in white robes, who are they, and where did they come from?" Who are they, and where did they come from? Two questions. And they are not the same question. Who are they is a question of identity. Where did they come from is a question of journey. The elder does not just want to know who the multitude is. He wants to know what they came through, what route they took, what they endured between the blood moon and the throne room that gave them the right to stand where the kings could not. And John, who has seen more than almost any human being who has ever lived, does not know the answer. Revelation 7, verse 14. I answered, Sir, you know. Sir, you know. John defers. The man who leaned on the chest of Jesus at the Last Supper. The man who stood at the foot of the cross. The man who saw the empty tomb, and the resurrected Christ, and the Spirit falling at Pentecost. Even John does not presume to know where this multitude came from, because the journey they took is not one that can be understood from the outside. It can only be understood by the one who sent them through it, and the one who watched them endure it. And the elder answers. And his answer is the single most important sentence in this entire study. Revelation 7, verse 14. And he said, These are they who have come out of the great tribulation. They have washed their robes, and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. These are they who have come out of the great tribulation, not who avoided the great tribulation, not who were removed from the great tribulation, not who watched the great tribulation from a safe distance, who came out of it, who went into it and emerged on the other side, who walked through the blood moon and the earthquake and the falling stars and the shaking of the heavenly powers, and came out wearing white. And how did their robes become white? They washed them in the blood of the Lamb, the most paradoxical image in all of Scripture. Washing something in blood to make it white. Submerging a garment in the reddest substance that exists, and pulling it out the purest color that exists. It defies every law of physics and every instinct of logic. And it is the gospel in a single image. The blood that should have stained them is the blood that cleansed them. The death that should have destroyed them is the death that saved them. The Lamb who was slaughtered is the Lamb before whose throne they are standing and singing. And the blood on the moon and the blood of the Lamb are connected in a way that most blood moon prophecy has never articulated. The moon turns red because the creation is groaning under the weight of blood that has been spilled on the earth since Cain killed Abel. The blood of the Lamb is the only blood in history that was spilled not as an act of violence, but as an act of redemption. The blood moon displays the problem. The blood of the Lamb provides the solution. The blood moon says something has gone catastrophically wrong. The blood of the Lamb says something has been done to make it catastrophically right. And the multitude standing in white before the throne is the proof that the Lamb's blood is more powerful than the blood the moon is crying about. The creation groans because of blood. The multitude sings because of blood. The same substance, the same color. Two completely different stories. And the blood moon is the moment where both stories become visible simultaneously. The red of the moon and the white of the robes. The agony of the creation and the worship of the redeemed. The hiding of the kings and the standing of the saints. Both real, both happening, both visible. And the only thing that determines which story you are in is whose blood you are covered by. And then John sees what awaits the multitude. And this passage is the emotional payoff of the entire 5,000-year prophetic chain. Everything Enoch walked for, everything Joel wept over, everything Jesus died for, everything Peter preached and Paul endured and John witnessed. It was all for this, Revelation 7 verses 15 through 17. Therefore they are before the throne of God, and serve him day and night in his temple. And he who sits on the throne will shelter them with his presence. Never again will they hunger. Never again will they thirst. The sun will not beat down on them, nor any scorching heat. For the Lamb at the center of the throne will be their shepherd. He will lead them to springs of living water, and God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. God will wipe away every tear, not prevent the tears, wipe them away, which means the tears were real. The suffering was real. The tribulation they came out of was not metaphorical. It was the actual lived, groaning, birth pain enduring, hoopamone requiring experience of walking through the blood moon season, with nothing but the blood of the Lamb, and the word of their testimony, and a faith that held when everything shakeable was being shaken. And God does not delegate the wiping. He does not send an angel. He does not issue a decree from a distance. He who sits on the throne, the same face that the kings were hiding from, reaches out with his own hand and wipes the tears from their eyes. The face that terrified the mighty comforts the faithful. The same God, the same face. Two utterly different experiences of encountering it, determined entirely by whether you hid from it or stood before it. Never again will they hunger, because they hungered. Never again will they thirst, because they thirsted. The sun will not beat down on them, because it beat down on them. Every promise in this passage is a reversal of a specific suffering, which means the white robes were not given to people who had comfortable lives. They were given to people who had been stripped bare by the locust plague, overwhelmed by the swarming arbe, eroded at root level by the crawling yelek, and nearly consumed by the finishing hasil, and who still did not let go. These are they who came out, not who sat out, not who opted out, not who were pulled out before things got difficult, who came out, through. The preposition matters more than any theological debate about the timing of the rapture or the sequence of the tribulation. Through. They went in, and they came out, and they are wearing white, and they are singing, and God is wiping their tears, because the tears were real, and the journey was real, and the blood moon was real, and they walked through all of it, because they had learned what Enoch learned 5,000 years earlier. The walking is the point. Hithhalek, the continuous, daily, moment by moment, breath by breath walking with God that does not stop when the locusts come, that does not stop when the army advances, that does not stop when the earth shakes and the sun goes dark and the moon turns the color of blood, and every visible sign says this is the end of everything. The walking continues. The Hithhalek holds, because the walking was never dependent on the circumstances. It was dependent on the one being walked with. And the one being walked with does not change when the circumstances change. He is the same yesterday and today and forever. And the walking with him is the same yesterday and today and forever. And the multitude in white is the proof that the walking works, that it holds, that it carries you through the tribulation and out the other side, and into the presence of the throne, where the tears are wiped and the hunger ends, and the Lamb becomes the shepherd, and the springs of living water never run dry. That is the complete prophetic chain. 5 voices, 5,000 years, one message. Enoch saw the blood moon as the creation's groan, the cosmic order responding to the weight of human rebellion, the heavenly communication system carrying an urgent message in a color that means blood. Joel placed the blood moon on a timeline. after the locust plague, after the even now, after the outpouring of the Spirit, before the great and dreadful day. And he embedded in the middle of the judgment a whispered invitation that defies every standard of earned consequence. Shuvu Eli, come back to me. Jesus confirmed the blood moon and identified it as the final contraction before the delivery of the kingdom that cannot be shaken. He connected it to the war that started on Mount Hermon. He placed it in the context of a spiritual conflict between the powers of darkness and the purposes of God. And he told his followers what to do when they see it. Stand up. Lift your heads. Your redemption is drawing near. Peter and Paul placed you on the timeline and gave you the tools to survive the gap between the outpouring and the blood moon. Apokaradokia, hupomone, the eager expectation that cranes forward, and the patient endurance that remains under the weight, the groaning of the Spirit inside you, matching the groaning of the creation around you, both pushing toward the same delivery. And John saw the delivery, the sixth seal, the blood moon in its fullest expression, the kings hiding and the saints standing. The face of God, terrifying the unprepared and comforting the faithful. The multitude in white who came out of the great tribulation, with robes washed in the blood of the Lamb, and the promise that every tear, every hunger, every thirst, every scorching heat they endured on the way through would be personally, tenderly, permanently undone by the hand of God himself. That is the blood moon. Not a spectacle, not a curiosity, not an Instagram moment, not a prophecy chart entry, a sign embedded in a 5,000-year chain of revelation that connects the first man who walked with God to the last multitude who will stand before his throne. A sign that says, the creation is groaning, the birth pains are intensifying, the judgment is approaching, the door is still open, and the question the elder asked John is the question being asked of you right now. Where did you come from, and where are you going? Because the blood moon is above you, the face of Christ is behind it, the throne is ahead of you, the tribulation is around you, and the only path from here to there, from the blood moon to the throne room, from the groaning to the singing, from the tears to the wiping away of the tears, is the path that Enoch found 5,000 years ago, and never deviated from. The walk, the hitholic, the daily, continuous, honest, unbroken communion with the God who is still speaking through the heavens to anyone who will listen, the God who has not stopped whispering even now, return to me, since the day Joel first delivered those words, to a nation standing in the ruins of a locust plague. The God who shook the mountain of the Watcher's curse with the glory of his transfigured Son. The God who poured out his Spirit on 120 people in an upper room and has not withdrawn it. The God who holds the 7 seals in his hand, and who paused the judgment after the 6th one, to let John see what was waiting on the other side. The multitude, the white robes, the palm branches, the singing, and the wiping of every tear by a hand that was nailed to a cross before it was raised to a throne. That is where the walk leads. That is what the hithalic produces when you refuse to stop, when the locusts come and you keep walking, when the army advances and you keep walking, when the earth shakes and you keep walking, when the sun goes dark and the moon turns red and the stars fall and the heavens roll up like a scroll, and every mountain and island is moved from its place, and you keep walking. Because Enoch walked and God took him, And if you are listening to this right now, and you know, in the deepest part of your spirit, that the walk has not been what it should have been, that the Hithalek has been interrupted, that the continuous has become occasional, and the daily has become weekly, and the honest has become performative, and the communion has dried into habit, and the relationship that was supposed to be the environment of your life has become a compartment you visit when you remember. If you know that, if you feel that, if the weight of what you have heard across these hours has settled on your chest, and you recognize the ache as the same groaning that Paul described, the spirit inside you, responding to the truth of a prophetic chain that was built across 5,000 years for exactly this moment, then hear the even now one more time, because it is still echoing. It has been echoing since Joel delivered it, and it has not stopped. The army is closer now than it was when Joel spoke. The birth pains are more frequent. The signs in the heavens are more visible. The heavenly powers are being shaken, and the even now is still here. The door is still open. The whisper has not been withdrawn. God is not asking you to understand every detail of the prophetic timeline. He is not asking you to decode every blood moon or map, every tetrad onto a geopolitical event. He is asking you to walk, to start walking, to resume the walk that was interrupted, to take the first step of a Hithalek that could carry you, one breath at a time, one day at a time, one honest prayer at a time, from where you are right now to the throne room, where the multitude is standing in white and singing with a volume that shakes the foundations of heaven. And the first step of that walk is the simplest and the hardest thing a human being can do. Surrender. Not understanding, not agreement, not theological sophistication. Surrender. The laying down of your right to manage your own life, and the acceptance that the one who placed the moon in the sky and wrote the message it carries is more qualified to direct your steps than you are. And if you are ready to take that step, if the prophetic chain that began with Enoch and ran through Joel and Jesus and Peter and Paul and John has brought you to the place where the only honest response is yes. Yes, I hear it. Yes, I feel it. Yes, I know the walk has been broken and I want it restored. Yes, I believe the blood of the Lamb is more powerful than the blood on the moon. Yes, I want to be part of the multitude who comes out rather than the kings who hide. Then I am going to ask you to do something right now. Not later. Not tomorrow. Not when you have thought about it more. Right now. In this moment. While the even now is still echoing, and the door is still open, and the Spirit is still groaning inside you, toward the delivery that the creation has been craning its neck to see. Type in the comments below, I accept Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior, not because typing words on a screen saves you, but because confession is the first step of the walk, Romans 10, verse 9. If you declare with your mouth, Jesus is Lord, and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. And Romans 10, verse 13, quoting Joel, completing the circle, closing the chain. Everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. Everyone. The same word Joel used, the same word Peter preached at Pentecost, the same promise that has been embedded in the prophetic timeline since a man named Enoch took his first step alongside God and discovered that the walking was not just an activity. It was the point. The whole point. The only point. Type it. I accept Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior. And then start walking. Not tomorrow. Tonight. Right now. In whatever room you are sitting in. With whatever brokenness you are carrying. With whatever shame is telling you that you are not qualified. And whatever fear is telling you that you have waited too long. And whatever voice is telling you that the even now cannot possibly still apply to someone who has been running this long and this far in the wrong direction. It applies. It still applies. It has always applied. And it will continue to apply until the seventh seal opens, and the door that has been open since Joel first delivered the whisper, finally, permanently, irreversibly closes. But it has not closed yet, and you are still here, and the blood moon is still a warning, not a verdict, and the walk is available to you right now. The same walk Enoch took, the same walk that carried him out of the stream of mortality that drowned every other name in Genesis 5. The walk that does not end at a grave, but at a throne. The walk that transforms you from a spectator watching the blood moon through a screen into a participant in the multitude who walks through it and comes out the other side wearing white and singing salvation belongs to our God. That multitude is not full yet. There is room. The robes are available. The blood of the Lamb has not lost its power. And the God who walked with Enoch 5,000 years ago is walking still. Right now, in this room, beside you, waiting for you to match his stride. Start walking, and if this has spoken to your spirit tonight, if these hours have carried a weight that you know is not just information, but invitation, share this with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who has been watching the sky with fear instead of hope. Someone who has been consumed by the spectacle of the blood moon and has never been shown the sanctuary on the other side of it. Someone who needs to know that the even now is still echoing, and the door is still open, and the walk is still available. Share it. Send it. Put it in front of the person who comes to mind right now, the person whose face you are seeing as I say these words. Because the heavens are speaking, the creation is groaning, the blood moon is coming, and the question is not whether you have seen it. The question is whether you will walk through it. Enoch walked, and God took him. The multitude walked, and God wiped their tears. Your turn.